This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I welcome you to this morning's proceedings. Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. The main item for the discussion today is the second part of our investigation into transport safety. Please make sure, I'll do my own as well, that your electronic devices are switched off or at least on silent mode. Can I also ask guests and members to position their microphones so they can be heard clearly, moving them nearer to you by the base, not by the neck, please, because that seems to damage them. Also, we have had problems in the past with hotspots, so if you can resist the urge to use your hotspot in the chamber, that'd be very kind. So, can I start now by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies for absence from Assembly Member Moema, and Assembly Member Pigeon will be joining us at around about 11 o'clock.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So, starting off, can we note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if any members have any other interests to declare, please? No? All good? Then can we also now look at the minutes and confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 27th of September to be signed by me as a correct record? Yep. Agreed? Marvellous. And now looking at list of actions, can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Transport Committee? Thank you. So, we now move to the main item of business, which is our question and answer session. This is the second part of our investigation, and today we'll be focusing on personal security. First of all, I'd like to welcome our guests. Can I start with Siwan Hayward, OBE, Director of Compliance and Policing, Operations and Security and Transport for London. Well, that's a nice snappy little title, isn't it? Second, can I welcome Mandy McGregor, and she's Head of Policing and Community Safety Transport for London. I then turn to someone we've seen quite a lot of recently, Alex Smith, Head of Campaigns, London TravelWatch. And then a new first for Chief Superintendent Chris Casey, Divisional Commander, London and South East England, British Transport Police. And then finally, another new guest is, although I'm not sure we've seen you before, Siwan, have we? No, we haven't. No, so Siwan is our first new guest, and the two. So we come to Christina Jessah, who's the Operational Command Unit Commander, Roads and Transport Policing Command, Metropolitan Police Service. So there we are. Good. So we shall now kick off the session. I'm going to start with the first question, and this is to all. And can I ask, what are the latest trends for harassment and hate crime on the public transport network? If I start with you, Chief Superintendent.
I suppose in both areas, particularly hate crime at the minute is a significant increase, even before what we call Operation Overhand, which is BTP's response to the tension that's raised following the conflict in Israel with Hamas. We were already starting to see hate crime was increasing year on year, but particularly during October, November, we've seen really significant increases in hate crime, particularly anti-Semitic hate crime, but also anti-Islamic hate crime as well. So broadly in the direction of growth in that space, which is concerning. But actually, I think there is a part to it that, to some degree, there is a bit about confidence in reporting. And over the last few years, we've done a huge amount around the We Stand Together campaign. We've introduced loads of new channels for people to report to us in terms of tech systems, the Guardian app, and a variety of other methods, effectively online reporting, etc., which I think plays a part. So I think it's a bit about confidence, and I think there's a bit about routes to report to us as well that has helped in that space. In terms of sexual harassment, we're getting a much clearer picture of that now, because we've, the last couple of years, started to flag sexual harassment and incidents that probably we wouldn't have recorded in the past because they weren't particularly clear maybe in the legislation, but we do record those and we flag them. The new legislation in the new year will make that easier to discern, but effectively, that's been a growth area, but we haven't always had the picture, I guess, in the longer term to be able to compare against.
DCS, Jessah.
Yes, so we've also seen an increase in the reporting for all kinds of hate crime, but particularly, as Chris has said, with anti-Semitic hate crime, crime against Muslim victims, and also homophobic crime. For similar reasons, we have been part of many campaigns in the last year, which has encouraged reporting and also raised awareness amongst staff of how to flag our reports correctly so that victims can be identified with their protected characteristics, and also having the confidence to flag it to the appropriate teams to progress for them.
Thank you.
So good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. And I won't go over the grounds that my police colleagues have covered in terms of the actual data, but broadly, as Transport for London, with our policing partners, we are absolutely committed that every journey in London should be safe and feel safe. And in terms of thinking about how we prioritise our activity and resources, we significantly focus effort and attention on those groups who suffer and experience victimisation and abuse. So we have a harm-led approach, because we are acutely conscious that feeling safe on public transport is vitally important in the choices that people make about the journeys they take across the capital. So, as my police partners have already said, we recognise that hate crime, all forms of hate crime, is underreported. And with our police partners, we've put huge effort into making clear and visible across the public transport network that we recognise hate crime, that hate crime is not tolerated in any way on our network. And in addition to that reporting campaign that you've seen, which very much calls out the kind of solidarity that we want to see between users of public transport, about saying we stand together against hate crime. So in addition to that, we in TfL, with our police partners, do a huge amount of work with various stakeholder groups to increase the confidence to reporting hate crime, and knowing that reporting of hate crime will result in action being taken against perpetrators and create a safer network. So alongside that stakeholder engagement to address underreporting, we've also done a significant amount of work to encourage active bystander involvement, to challenge, to be part of addressing that challenge of hate crime occurring on our network. Now, my colleagues have already touched on the figures and the rise that we've seen, in particular since the 7th of October. But it's worth noting that hate crime on public transport normally occurs because of another incident, because of someone being challenged about their fare, because of a kind of altercation between passengers where hate then comes out, or because of people's frustration about the delays in the service or other issues. People don't come onto our network to commit hate crime. It comes about because of other issues that are happening. So there is something important for us about looking at those precursor events as well. But yes. But overall, I think we all recognise that hate crime is probably underreported, and we're putting a huge effort, particularly through stakeholder groups as well as our wider publicity, to encourage the reporting of hate crime. And both BTP and the Met have done some quite good work as well in terms of looking through social media and looking at report when hate crime has been filmed, but the victim hasn't reported, still acting on that information, reaching out through direct messaging to try and really encourage that culture that crime is reported, it's acted on, and we create a culture which feels safe and welcoming and inclusive for everyone.
Thank you.
I think my colleagues have said it very well, but just to say about about 6% of total crime is flagged as hate crime, and racist hate crime accounts for about 3/4 of that. So, as Siwan says, we're doing everything we can to encourage reporting, and insight from London TravelWatch and other stakeholders is really part of our approach to improving our understanding and then how we act on that.
Thank you. I won't go over the numbers again, but it's a really helpful illustration. I would just touch on the reporting point, which I think is really important, and as has kind of been recognised, it is likely a significant underestimation of the true sort of picture of hate crime out there, which is why the work is really important that is being done, raise awareness of reporting, how you can make it easy to report, and so that something will actually happen if you report. I would also just add, I mean, it sounds very basic, but just making sure people know what hate crime is. I think we've had instances where we've been talking to people about something that's happened to them, and they haven't realised it's a hate crime. I mean, obviously there are sort of more extreme cases where it's very clear, but again, I think there's maybe not a full understanding amongst the public of what constitutes a hate crime. And obviously, if you don't know it's a hate crime, how can you report it?
Can I just add just to that point, our messaging to customers is that they shouldn't worry about whether it's a crime or not. That's for the police to determine. But if there's any incidents that are worrying them or they feel victimised, please come forward and report it. The police will then investigate and determine if it's a crime, and then the action to take in response to that.
Right, thank you. So, have we seen any changes in patterns post-pandemic at all? Has the pandemic had any effect on the patterns of these incidents?
Of hate crime specific?
Harassment and hate crimes, yeah.
Yeah, so broadly, yes. I mean, particularly in terms of the underground, you know, pre-pandemic, you know, we kind of had an established level of crime. As we went into the pandemic, obviously the network is less busy, less opportunity to commit certain crimes, so sex offences particularly. There is less cover, so to speak, in terms of the network's less busy. But broadly, you know, we saw huge reductions during the pandemic, and then as the network has started to recover and get back to normal, and I think it's, you know, it's there now in terms of back to pretty normal, busy network, we're starting to see that the majority of the crime has rebounded effectively, and in some cases grown. So, you know, particularly acquisitive crime, so theft, robbery, shoplifting, fare evasion, and then the associated public order incidents that go with that, they're all a growth area, I would say, post-pandemic, and they're significant. You know, there are some significant changes in that space, which have obviously been reported on recently.
I would just say the proportion of hate crime as total crime hasn't changed significantly. It's around 6%. That was the same during COVID. And sex offences, again, everything dropped significantly in terms of level, but the proportion didn't change too much. Where we have seen growth is in sexual harassment. So not offences under the Sexual Offences Act, but public order, so sexually motivated comments, gestures, that's where we've seen a big growth in terms of reports to BTP.
And you'll know that, I hope you're all aware that we, in partnership... There you go. We've put a really significant effort in terms of raising awareness and understanding of what constitutes sexual harassment and the behaviours that we do not tolerate on our network. So, yeah, in collaboration, there's a really significant public awareness campaign which names the behaviours that are unacceptable on our network. And from a lot of the research that we've done, and clearly really helped by a lot of the insight we get from London TravelWatch and partners, we know that women who experience sexual harassment, that a lot of times they don't think that the behaviour constitutes offences. We've already talked about constitutes it. They also think that it's not going to be taken seriously by the police, and we put a lot of effort, and police partners put a lot of effort into publicising the action that they take and the value of all reporting. Whether we want to go through, you know, whether and it's absolutely fine for a victim to or someone experiences sexual harassment not to necessarily go through the criminal justice system, but actually all that reports, all that information, all that intelligence helps build a picture on this. So in terms of where we have seen a rise in the reporting of sexual harassment, for us that's incredibly positive, because we know that women experience sexual harassment across society and on public transport, and we know that those crimes have historically been significantly underreported. So that's an area where we want to see this reporting gap close. So the increase in reporting we are seen as a very positive sign that there's more confidence to come forward, there's more, and there's confidence in policing, and then therefore there's far more action that can be taken by our police partners against those who perpetrate these offences.
Just one quick point on the back of that as well, something Siwan said. there is the point for us as well in terms of the crime we detect in that space, in particularly sexual offences. We detect about 15 or 16% of those crimes. That doesn't sound huge, but actually in terms of if you look at it as a comparator of policing across the country, it is a fairly good position, but it's not somewhere we're comfortable with in terms of that solve rate. But there is a part that we actually the victim's voice. It isn't always that a prosecution is what the victim wants, and I think this is something that previously we may not have understood that well enough or been as open to that, and we may have been very tunnel vision on prosecution effectively being the outcome, and it is something that we're trying to get better in terms of recording what was it the victim wanted out of this, and actually they may not want a prosecution, so that number may not reflect fully actually the amount of victims that are satisfied with the police outcome. So yeah, just a minor point on the back of that.
Yes. Come in at this point.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to go back to Chief Superintendent Casey and what you said about the drop-off in overall crime levels as a whole on the transport network during the pandemic and the fact that's come back. How did you change your deployments and what did you do with your teams during that period? Did you put, for example, more effort into solving each one, doing investigations, or was there plenty for you to do?
Yeah, so there were, so it was interesting actually. So in terms of there was greater capacity, more time to spend on each investigation. So broadly across the piece, I haven't got the exact number in front of me, but our detection rates for crime increased, fairly significantly. We also had more capacity, and people stood out more interested in terms of county lines activity. So people who are travelling around the network stood out more because actually there was less need to be travelling. So there were different areas where effectively that resource was put to, but it did demonstrate, the level of resource versus the amount of crime. We could get much better rates. It's always the case, isn't it? If we have more people, we can always do more. But yeah, effectively that was the picture we saw during COVID.
Okay, that's really interesting. So there is a relationship between the level of resource and the amount you can do and the amount of results that you get that could be used to make arguments for further budget increases in the future. You should definitely be writing that evaluation up, I think. Sorry, Mandy.
And I was just going to comment that BTP played a really important role in helping to enforce the public health regulations at the same time.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Assembly Jessah.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. If I can ask you, Siwan, you talked about working with stakeholders, and can also commend the awareness-raising campaigns that you run and the messaging. I think credit should be given where it's due, and it is sort of visible and in my opinion, effective. But the question I want to ask is, you talked about working with stakeholders. Can you tell me who some of the stakeholders are and how do you work with them? And in particular, do you work with community groups like the Community Security Trust, Tell Mama?
So we are Can I get this on mic? Okay. So I'm very, very loud as well. So who needs a mic? But so we really benefit. In TfL that we have a really active and engaging stakeholder team, and Alex will know them very well. And they really support the management of really ongoing and very informed collaborative stakeholder relationships for us. So particularly, so if we, I could give you a long list of all the organisations that we work with, but obviously, particularly in the area of hate crime, we've done a lot of work with the Community Security Trust, within the Jewish community, with a number of the different organisations representing Jewish communities across London. We do work with the Muslim Council of Britain. We do work, obviously, internally with our own staff networks as well, which are really important insights and kind of feedback loops for us. We work with Shoram, Tell Mama, Gallup, Anti-Semitism UK, Changing Faces. We've done a lot of work, and this particularly came up, obviously, during COVID, where we did see a shift in pattern in hate crime in terms of both the victimisation, but the level of fear being felt by colleagues from this South Asian, Southeast Asian community, because there was, as you know, some very polarising views about, so we developed, really effective relationships with groups representing the interests of Asian and Southeast Asian communities and their particular victimisation that they experienced during COVID and beyond that. So there's a really long list of different organisations we work with. Mandy's very much at the forefront of this, but we take. You will know that we put, as I've already described, that in terms of our commitment to the vision that I think we all share to ending violence against women and girls, and for us that means ending violence against women and girls on public transport. It means TfL playing its full role in terms of violence against women and girls in public spaces, but it also means seeking to end the sexual harassment and sexual offences experienced by our frontline staff. So we've got this kind of three-pronged approach in our overarching ending violence against women and girls programme, and we've got a really established group of organisations representing the interest of women and girls who we use on a regular basis to inform our programme, to give us feedback on the work that we do, and to bring us insights in terms of where our priorities and resources should be. Do you want to help outline the groups we work with?
I think you covered many of them. So I think there are different levels. So Siwan's mentioned the strategic engagement. Most of that is led centrally by our strategic engagement team. But an incredible amount of effort is done on the network level, so engagement events where you'll have frontline officers, both our own in TfL but our police partners, going into communities, meeting with community groups, holding events for end violence against women and girls, the 25th of November and the 16 days of activism. We have a number of events that we're running locally with Gallup, Hestio and other organisations. So our frontline engagement activity is really key to that, working alongside these community groups out on the network or in the communities, trying to understand their experiences, their concerns, and then also have an opportunity to speak to police about what we're doing about it. So that's a fundamental part of our approach to tackling sexual harassment, but also hate crime.
Yeah, just I won't repeat what's been said, but there is a huge amount of work that goes on. And I think particularly recently, it's shown the benefit in terms of the relationships we've already got with CST, with Shomrim and other groups, Tell Mama, but we've been really committed as part of the response to the tension we're seeing to make sure we're really impartial in our approach, and we're not, obviously we've seen in terms of the anti-Semitic hate crime has been the most significant increase, but actually we're making sure that our engagement and working alongside the Met and others to do this is really consistent across both communities effectively, and particularly during the recent Hate Crime Awareness Week we did a lot of activity that was by chance anti-Semitic focused, so the timing was consistent in terms of what we were seeing, and that was planned out well in advance. But actually also through November, anti-Islamophobia month, again lots of activity throughout that month. And I would definitely say, particularly in terms of CST and Shomrim, we've had so much information shared with us. We've used those groups as a great conduit to get our message out as well, and being really clear around the Orthodox Jewish community, not particularly, generally not as social media tech involved effectively. So actually using community members to get messaging out, that's really given a huge amount of reassurance at a time that people are really concerned about travelling, and we're getting that feedback. But those long-established relationships have really helped us to hopefully bridge that gap and to give reassurance to communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. So the next question is from me again, and we've just had some recent data on crime and on the public transport, and it shows that crime across virtually all modes on TfL transport is up by about 28% from compared to pre-pandemic levels. So this question, I'll start with Mandy. What is our response to that, and how can we tackle that?
And what we have seen is levels of crime returning to pre-pandemic levels, and in some offence types and on some modes we've seen that increase over and above the levels we saw back in 1920. The increase is largely being driven by theft offences. We have seen increases in acquisitive crime, so theft and robbery, and the largest increase in that has been on London Underground. But we're working really hard with our police partners to tackle that through crime prevention activity and targeted police activity as well, where we know that there's groups targeting busy places, and of course transport, not just in London but in other mass public transport networks around the world. Theft is the main issue, and so we're working hard to tackle that alongside the higher harm offences, including robbery and what we've just been discussing in terms of hate crime, sexual offences, and violence.
Did anyone else want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, so we also have, in terms of enforcement, a number of teams who focus on continuing to hunt for our outstanding suspects, who have been working to bring down a number of people who we know are committing offences that we can get hold of and bring towards the courts to put in place post-conviction orders to prevent them using the transport network and therefore reduce offending. In terms of prevention, we have a number of officers who are attached to the schools teams who work closely with our colleagues on the local boroughs to go into schools, to particularly in the run-up to school, starting again in September, providing information and support to young people who are probably going to be using the trains and the buses for the first time about how to keep safe. And we also have a number of pop-up sessions that complement the campaigns where we go to our transport hubs and try, and particularly with our elderly communities, explain ways in which they can keep safe.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to, because we are short on time on this section, but I am just going to let Assembly Member McCartney come in.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I think it's probably for the Chief Superintendent, and that's how does the rise in crime across London on the transport network compare with the rest of the country? Are they having similar increases or not?
I can't talk to the rest of the country broadly. I know major cities and conurbations are seeing increases. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but I know in London, if you look at it a London level versus the underground, it doesn't equate. London more broadly has seen increases, but if you drill down to the stations and the areas where we're having our most significant increases, that does generally marry up, particularly in terms of robbery, with the Met boroughs and the kind of the magnitude of increase they're seeing. So it's not something that is isolated to the Tube.
It's not isolated to Londoners. I think it'd be useful to get comparative figures, Chair, if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. If I can now move on to Assembly Member Jessah.
Thank you, Chair. And a couple of questions again to you, Siwan. So TfL used to publish annual crime reports in its TfL Crime and Antisocial Behaviour Bulletin. Mm-hmm. However, this was last published in 2021. You now publish a Crime and Antisocial Behaviour 6-monthly report, which is published as part of panel papers and is potentially harder to find online. What is the reason for this change?
Okay, so you're right that we used to publish a crime and antisocial behaviour bulletin, and the feedback from that was that was very hard for people to find, and because it was uploaded on the TfL website. So obviously, as a public body, the decision to move to publish 6 monthly crime reports with quite detailed information that we then present to the panel of the TfL board. So there's an opportunity in public for that data to be scrutinised, for questions to be asked of TfL from the board that holds us to account. We, as a public body, that's absolutely the right thing for us to do. As you've all seen from the headlines that are in the papers today, and I don't think anybody's having any problem getting hold of our data and interpreting our data, so we have an absolute commitment to the continued publication of crime and antisocial behaviour data. Obviously, as you've heard this morning from myself and my colleagues, actually within that data, there's a lot to be interpreted. There's lots of types of crime that we are actively seeking people to report more of, because we know these crime types are underreported on our network. So looking at crime figures, it tells you part of the story, but doesn't tell the full story. And so one of the areas that we are looking at as TfL is really thinking about how can we give rich and value-adding kind of data and insight to to the London public, to people who use public transport and people who wish to use public transport more frequently. How can we give them really rich insight into that data, and actually what are the actions that we're taking, and what's the activity under the way, and what are the results that we're seeing, so that we don't publish the data in isolation from actually the context and the action that's been taken around it. But we will continue to publish, as you've seen, our data in a very inaccessible form for scrutiny by our panel, and we put that out in advance. In addition, obviously British Transport Police make widely available crime data through their website and through the national portal, and that is to an extent interrogatable, and you can look at that in terms of station level data and line level data. And then the Met's data is published, and bus related crime, which is a distinct and bespoke query that we draw out from the Met data, is within that overall Met data as well.
So in terms of the data from different from different agencies like BTP, the Met, how do you bring it together to get an overall picture?
So, yeah, I have a small team of incredibly expert analysts who draw out the data from British Transport Police, the data from the Met. The data that you'll see and that's been published and which is widely available. So for bus-related crime, we run a bespoke query on the Met crime reporting system, and we take a very broad definition of what constitutes bus-related crime. So it's any crime that happens on a bus or at a bus stop, or where potentially that crime was initiated on the bus. So if someone's followed off a bus and they are robbed in the street, we would still count that within our figures of bus-related crime. So we have a very distinct query. I'm going to look to Mandy because she's more expert in this. Have I? That's pretty much definite.
You've done a very good job. There is some work that we do on the TfL side. BTP have different crime categories compared to Home Office forces. That makes sense. There's sometimes different line of route crime for BTP. So we bring that together. Our clever analysts in the back get the offence codes and match it all up so we can draw comparisons in terms of both the volume and the rates of crime on TfL's networks.
Thank you. Chair, I'm conscious of the time, but just one more question. Again to you, Siwan. So in June 2023, I'm wearing my Labour group hat here, we asked TfL where the missing TfL crime and antisocial behaviour bulletins were. And TfL replied that, and I quote, "We are working towards publishing a new interactive report which will replace the previous bulletins. We are anticipating launching this during summer 2023, unquote. Can you update me on this project, given the interactive report did not go live this summer?"
Yes, thank you. And so we are, as we said in that answer, we are working on that dashboard, but it is back to this question about making sure where that dashboard really adds value in terms of informing the people of London about what's happening across the network. So we've done some initial work on the kind of skeleton dashboard, but we think there's much more we can do, and we welcome the opportunity both of this committee, the feedback from London TravelWatch and other stakeholders about how we produce a dashboard that really kind of brings and adds value in addition to all the data that's already published. So we published the bulletins, we've got the Met data, we've got the BTP data, and that's what we want to make sure is that the dashboard that we bring out is going to be of real value to all of London.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Now move to Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you very much. Some questions for Alex. Alex, TravelWatch undertook some research into personal safety on the transport network in 2022. What led you to do this research, and what were some of the more sort of concerning, unexpected findings from the research?
Thank you. So, as London TravelWatch, we're here to advocate for people travelling in and around London. And obviously a really big part of that is being able to travel safely and free from abuse or harassment. Safety has pretty much always been an underlying concern, but I think in 2021 we saw some quite high-profile incidents which I think really brought it to the forefront and put it up on the agenda. So a series of very sad, high-profile murders, particularly Sarah Everard as she was travelling home, and Sabina Nessa as she was also going out for the evening. So that very much brought it to the forefront. And then also alongside the pandemic, where there was an increase, I think particularly in anti-Asian hate crime. So again, it was just very much a topic on the agenda, and we thought it was worth kind of exploring that further to build a bigger understanding so we can kind of help tackle those issues. And London's travel environment is obviously a really key arena in which unsafe situations play out, so it seemed particularly relevant. A lot of really useful information came out of that. Some of it expected, sadly, some of it less so. I think for me, two things stood out. One is the scale of the issue, and it's an issue across all demographics, but there are particular groups who are particularly impacted by this. So we've already discussed sort of women and girls. It's more of an issue for them. Also disabled people. So I think it's about 2 in 5 disabled people that we spoke to had experienced hate crime or harassment in the past 3 years. In our newer research, LGBTQ+ people, I think it was about 1 in 5. So it's quite high numbers. It's definitely not a niche issue. And then the other thing that really struck us was the impact that can have on people travelling. So a lot of people will change their behaviour. They'll carry alarms, for example. They'll travel on different modes. Maybe there's some modes that they feel not as safe on. And then also, some people will change when they travel. So I think of the people who said that they felt unsafe when travelling, 70% of them said that they would just completely avoid travelling at certain times. And a more of a sort of qual side of things, some people just stop travelling completely. Just the experience of having unsafe issues and the cumulative impact on them just meant they just didn't trust that they could go out and be safe.
Okay, thank you. And maybe to Siwan initially, Alex mentioned different modes being having some different sort of safety levels for people, or at least in people's minds when it comes to personal safety. Are there different personal safety challenges on different modes of transport that you find?
I'm just trying to think through. Sorry, that question. So,
as in, I'd say, do the challenges of the tube differ from the challenges on the bus network, for example?
I don't know. Yeah. So so obviously our endeavour is that all our customers should both have a consistent experience and feel safe and be safe across all modes. And it's as TfL, clearly we seek to both design out the risk of crime and antisocial behaviour occurring on our modes. We also try to ensure that all our modes are rich environments in terms of CCTV, in terms of lighting, in terms of the look and feel of the modes. There are obviously different challenges. I mean, there's an interesting about obviously crowding on the tube brings particular challenges with it, and then obviously, but all of it then is compounded by time of day, parts of London that you're in, how familiar you are with a place that you are or not. So it's not as I'm giving you a slightly too complicated answer for a very simple question, isn't it? Which is, so it's not quite as like there's this problem, this mode, and this problem, this mode. I think it's slightly more rich in that. But Chris is going to help me out here.
There's only, I think the thing that stood out for me in the report, and I thought this when the Elizabeth line was going live and I saw those stations, there is a distinct difference between the Elizabeth line infrastructure, the space, the platforms, how big they are, how light and bright the place is, probably the quality of the CCTV. There's a variety of things that are very different, I would say. So even Elizabeth line, which I think from the report from memory was kind of the second most place where people felt confident, second to private transport, it stood out quite significantly as a different travel experience, and it was one of the things that stood out in the report for me that I thought there is something there. I can't say across all the modes, but that was definitely one that stood out in terms of the Elizabeth line for sure. Okay, so it's possible to design out crime, or at least design out certain personal safety challenges and concerns on the transport network. I think so, and I think also you can design it in a way that probably makes people feel safer. I think there is I'm not saying people should feel unsafe on the underground at all, but it definitely, he's been designed, in modern times for, the 2023 and beyond network, which I guess the underground is, designed some time back, isn't it, in terms of, being ready for how busy the network is and some of those challenges it presents. Absolutely. Thank you. Mandy.
I was just going to add the priority crimes, high harm offences, where we focus all of our effort, are similar across the public transport networks. But the bus network in particular, given how many young people it carries, has more significant safeguarding of risks, and it's really important, with our safer transport teams, I say ours, but the transport teams that we fund in our Roads and Transport Policing Command, that they're out being visible, particularly after school periods, helping young people get home safely.
Thank you. Christina, do you want to come in at all?
Mandy, you took the words right. So we find the crime types are very similar, but the victim profile is slightly different. So we will have younger victims and more elderly victims as well, because they're more likely to use a bus and for shorter journeys. So that I think that would probably be the key area. But as Mandy said, our response to that is to have targeted patrols at the times when we know children will be commuting back and forth from school, and when some of our victims will be going to local shops, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to Alex and on to the most recent piece of research that TravelWatch did, which is on LGBTQ plus people's safety on London's transport network. What are some of the key findings in that report?
Yep. So as a bit of context, this report stemmed from the original research that we did. Again, it kind of showed that there were different groups impacted in different ways, so we wanted to look into more depth at different groups. So hopefully we can continue that. But the first group we wanted to look at was LGBTQ plus people. As mentioned earlier, it was pretty stark findings. So 1 in 5 respondents said that he'd experienced a hate crime in the past year while travelling on public transport in London. 4 in 5 people said that they had changed their behaviour or appearance when they travel to avoid abuse, or try and avoid abuse again when travelling. And then there was also a big thing around bystander behaviour. And sadly, a lot of people felt that when something happened, they weren't necessarily getting support from other people around them, whether that's because they weren't sure what to do, or just lack of confidence, or those sorts of things. So I think it was just under 2/3 of respondents who had experienced abuse or harm while travelling in London said that bystanders witnessed the incident but didn't intervene. And then I think a final theme that did come through, and this sort of stems back to some of the reporting issues we were talking about earlier, is that a lot of people didn't have confidence in the policing authorities, that if they reported something would be done about it, or it would be taken seriously, which really kind of put them off reporting it. And again, that makes it much harder to take strong action against it and protect these people. So based on those findings, what are your key sort of calls to action? Yes, so there's a few. So one, going back to the being active bystanders, is encouraging transport authorities, policing authorities and community groups is to just make sure people know what to do if they see something, how they can help, and encouraging that, making it much more the norm. So part of that will be sort of cultural change. So, making it as natural as, you see a pregnant woman who needs a seat, you offer her seat. Similarly, if you see someone maybe being harassed, you kind of intervene, presuming it's safe to do so. And a lot of people do want to do that, but they just don't necessarily know how. So it's, again, giving them the knowledge and equipment to do that. I think part of it goes back to infrastructure as well, which, again, we've touched upon. So making sure it feels like a safe environment. Have you got lots of lighting? Is sort of stuff around it safe? Are there staff there to help people if they need it, and also act as a deterrent to harassment? And then also sort of, it sounds very basic, but are there frequent and reliable services so people aren't stuck, particularly at night, in potentially unsafe situations, and they can get to where they need to go. And then the last sort of thing, again, relating to sort of trust in authorities, is just really need to build up that trust again. I know there is work being done, some really good work, but I think more needs to be done. And obviously trust, once it's broken, is difficult to build back. So I think it will take a lot of time, and just showing that trust is not misplaced and that action will be taken, and these crimes are taken seriously. And also addressing sort of potential anti-LGBTQ plus prejudice within organisations as well. Okay, thank you. Siwan, how has TfL taken on board these calls to action from TravelWatch?
Well, as with the previous report, we obviously really welcome these findings, and they underline the kind of the approach that we're already taking and the importance of that approach, and particularly the clarity of messaging in terms of hate crime not being tolerated on our network, in terms of being clear about any behaviour where you feel that you're being victimised on the basis of your protected characteristics. You know, tell people about it, report it. And that constitutes, and that constitutes a hate crime. But second to that, the importance of the messaging to bystanders. And you'll see in the campaigns that we're running, which we've uplifted recently across our networks since the beginning of October. Is the importance that we do really encourage active bystanders, and that we're not seeking for people to police the network, we're not seeking for people to put themselves in a risky situation, but we are saying support the person who's being targeted, report what you've seen, make a note, distract the individual, distract attention away from that. So we already have some really strong messaging around this. Our collective endeavour is about seeking to make the public transport environment hostile to offenders. So we're very offender focused in our approach, recognising particularly intersectionality, recognising the diversity of people who travel across London, and our desire for the network to feel safe and welcoming for everyone. It's a really welcome report. And we will continue to work with London TravelWatch on about how we particularly amplify a lot of the messaging and the confidence in reporting. In the input we have into the training of our staff and the availability of staff throughout from start of traffic to end of service, which is a commitment, as you know, that we have across all our modes.
Okay, just before we move on, another question. On Alex's point around infrastructure, which actually does go back to what Chris was saying about the Elizabeth line earlier. It strikes me that this is something that actually can be assessed in the same manner that you might assess PTI risk or something like that. That you can look at a station and assess its crime risk based on factors such as lighting and design. Is that something that you actively look at and then look at how you can improve design of public transport spaces?
Yes, absolutely. And so I think Transport for London still remains the only public body that voluntarily took on the statutory duty under Section 17 of the Crime and Disorder Act, which means that in any endeavour, so any project, any planning, any design that we're doing, we actively consider the prevention of crime and antisocial behaviour. So that's a proactive duty that's on TfL that we value as much as we value our equalities duties and our wider duties. So there is it's part and parcel of what we do. You will recognise that the Tube, we're celebrating 161 years of the Tube. It is an aged infrastructure with an investment programme across many of our lines to upgrade our lines, to improve the standards of the standards, the quality and the fabric of both our tube trains and their stations. And that's a long-term investment commitment. Very much does depend on capital funding coming forward from the government, as well as the own investment that we make as TfL. We are part of a scheme, and particularly our rail modes are part of schemes in terms of safeguarding on rail and secure station schemes, which all provide that level of kind of auditing and assessment that you describe in terms of being able to kind of consider where improvements can be made for a place to feel safe and secure. But we shouldn't lose the fact that actually crime occurs because of offenders. So we can do a huge amount to make places feel safe, but alongside that, we also need to look at offending behaviour and how we make the environments hostile to offenders.
Thank you. Chris is...
Yeah, just I suppose come back if that's okay. So definitely agree. Really welcomed report, and I think it's shone a light on a number of areas. I mean, it's early days, and we will work with TfL and Met and others to to take the report forward and to work with London TravelWatch. But I think there's a couple of bits that stood out for me. So in terms of the active bystanders, I think there's some work that we could do. I think probably be akin to some of the work we've done around violence against women and girls and around sexual harassment, because we were looking at some research recently recently where victims of such crimes were saying that, now 51% of those said that there was an active bystander intervention, which is significantly different to what we're hearing in terms of hate crime. So I think there is, and again, that's been a journey that we've taken, so actually it's positively increased in terms of the active bystander increase. I think the confidence in policing piece is a depressing read, if I'm candid, in terms of the fact that people don't feel confident to report those incidents to us, and it is something that we will actively work on. I think there's a big bit about promoting things like the Guardian app and other ways to contact us, and I think as 4G and 5G rolls out across the underground particularly and other modes, that is going to be really useful, and I think actually as that happens, we lean into greater promotion of the app, on trains, because that is one of the things that people don't know how to contact us. But if that was an easy scan the app and it's scan a QR code on the train, it was really well advertised. That's the sort of space I think we could get into. But yeah, if effectively, I mean, there's loads in there. I think it's there's lots of room to improve, particularly in terms of hate crime. I think in terms of our comms and taking a similar approach to what we've done in terms of Operation Overhand recently, and being really proactive and sharing those examples of what we've done with cases when they've been reported to us.
Okay, thank you. The specific point really that the TravelWatch report found in terms of trust and confidence was that LGBTQ plus people have very little trust and confidence in police and policing authorities. So what are you doing in terms of your work with that particular community to rebuild trust, especially when it comes to transport safety? And I'll come to Christina on that next, but Chris, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, just briefly. Again, I think the report is well timed, and it has been a foot on the ball moment for us in terms of looking at that. And I do think some of the work and relationships we've built pre-COVID probably haven't been re-established as well as they should be, particularly in terms of the LGBT community. It's something that, seeing the report and assessing it, I'm definitely seeing that there is work to be done. So we've done work last year in terms of making sure we've trained all of our neighbourhood policing officers in central London through Gallup around LGBT focused hate crime. There's lots we're doing, there's lots planned. But in terms of being engaged, well engaged with those communities and leaning in actually to some of the good work that Met have done around the LGBT specific officers on boroughs, there is more for us to do in that space.
Okay, thank you. Christina?
Yeah, so we're equally disappointed by the outcome of the report, because actually it does, as Chris said, highlight some areas that we have been found wanting. However, we are working on a number of initiatives that we've already had established for violence against women and girls, which we can quite easily expand to the LGBTQ plus communities in some sense, in some areas. In other areas, we'd like it more tailored. But examples already are Operation Stand, Safer Travel at Night, where we focus on areas where we know there will be a large community of LGBT community passengers, so Soho and Hoxton, for example. We also have referrals through third parties, such as Catch and Satera, so where victims aren't comfortable coming to police, they go to a third party first, which we found incredibly helpful. And as well as the BCUs, the basic command units, we now also have our own LGBTQ plus liaison officers within the Roads and Transport Command, which we found quite helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so back to you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you. Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got a couple of quick follow-ups to Alex, if that's okay. So I'm really pleased that we're talking about people's feelings, passengers feeling safe on the network, because, as it said, then if people stop travelling, then that's a massive impact on their life. So it's a very real issue. And Alex, going back to the 2020 report, one of the first recommendation is to create a safer travelling environment through CCTV and staff presence. You've mentioned briefly staffing on the network. Can you tell us a bit more about what TravelWatch think passengers want in terms of staff presence?
Yep, absolutely. So staffing is just, across the board, really important to people travelling. Aside from, obviously helping them get around and buy tickets and all those sorts of things, I think even just their presence can sort of act almost as a comfort that there is someone else there. act as a deterrent, even to sort of like low-level incidents or crimes or things like that, which again can just make a cumulative impact on how safe people feel. I think also they're really important there as a port of call. They're often sort of the first place that you go to for help. If something is happening, you're not sure what to do, you automatically, a lot of people will go ask the member of staff there, who will also often be able to kind of contact the authorities, potentially have a safe space that someone can go to. Again, they can just really help tackle the issue. Related to that, I think it's important that the staff are sort of trained to recognise when an incident is happening, again, know what to do, but also treat it in a sensitive way. Often these can be quite harmful or scary incidents for people, so it's important that they can kind of appropriately deal with that. So I think those are sort of the general things that people want, but overall very important to how safe people feel, I think, is what we found.
That's fantastic, thank you. And we know that at TfL Overground and Elizabeth Line stations, they are staffed from first to last train. Is that something that passengers want at all railway stations in London?
We haven't specifically asked that question, but I think, I definitely don't think people would say no to that. Again, I think nighttime is a particular time of concern for people. It's often when people feel least safe. So again, having that staff's presence there, particularly when there are less likely to be other bystanders around, I think is important to people. So I think that definitely wouldn't be a bad idea.
And finally, again, your 2020 report talks about, and you mentioned this about late night services, and you recommended that the number of late night rail services in the evening should be protected and increased. But actually, this committee's investigation, or your report for this committee's investigation to Outer London Transport, showed a cut in services run in train operators in London. So what's that cumulative effect of less often services late at night plus unstaffed stations? Do you have a sense of how much that's impacting people feeling safe on the network?
I think it's a good question, and maybe something we could explore further. So again, I think staff is important to people's perceptions of safety. So if staff aren't there, that will have an impact. And then similarly, if people are stuck or in a longer time at a station than they would like, and particularly if maybe, again, there's not many other people around, it's dark, maybe if the lighting's not as good as it could be, that again, I think will put people off travelling. And again, I think it was nearly half of women said they've stopped travelling completely at certain times of the day because they don't feel safe. So I think it is likely to contribute to that.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much, and excellent that Assemblymember Baker brought up staffing there. It is a really key issue, I think, and I think I want to put some questions to TfL about this, if that's all right, because you were talking about data and your reporting and all of that, and I think from an analysis of where staffing needs to be, where there might be lack of staffing, and things like that. I just wondered if you are recording data by whereabouts in a station something occurs. We obviously get the by mode data, but if you're talking about a tube station, for example, you could be you could be talking about within the station, on the platform, or on the train. And are you logging things according to those criteria? Maybe could we have any data that you hold on that?
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah.
I mean, the police do record. The police record whether the incident happened for BTP. It's much easier, but they will record if it happened on a train or in a station, and then when we dig into the issue for the analysis and how we're going to respond to issues in that, you will get some data on where it happened in the station as well. So we do have that, and we look at that when we're considering how we tackle a particular issue.
Maybe I should ask the police then. DCS Jessah, do you hold that data in a standardised form? Obviously, we think it needs cleaning up the way you described about buses, and I'm just wondering about trains and tubes, whether or not you keep that sort of granular data about whereabouts in the system.
So it is very challenging to decipher. So it's much easier at transport hubs if it's at a bus station or a bus stop. If it's between two bus stops, it gets quite challenging because often victims are clearly worrying about more important issues at the time.
Yeah, sorry, no, outside of bus, I'm talking about Transport for London tube services and train services more, because the issue of staffing of trains and tubes has been quite live for us recently.
Yeah, so that's more for myself in terms of BTP. So we do record that data. I think sometimes there's limitations around the way in which people can report. So we've opened up lots of routes. People can report online, text, etc. So sometimes the detail is lacking. So we still record the crime, but we can't always get that level of granularity. But we do break it down to platforms, entrance, booking hall, etc.
Would it be possible to get some of that data provided to the committee?
I don't see an issue with that. I think it's just the detail and the work to do it.
Sorry, you need to put your microphone on, or literally the people online can't hear you at all.
I mean, the data's available and we can give it to you, but it's a partial picture, so you couldn't draw any conclusions from it. That's why I think it's really important when we look at it at a local. Like if we've got a problem, we identify the problem, and then we try and understand what's happening there. That's when it's really useful.
Sure, yeah. I mean, obviously, we'd want to have that over time to see whether levels of staffing have affected the locations of these things. I think that's the sort of thing we want to look at.
So the challenge, I think, in terms of drawing that correlation, so there's the two factors. One, to amplify Mandy's factor, which is that obviously the vast majority of crimes that happen on our tube network are pickpocketing, and for the majority of pickpocketing, people do not know where they were targeted. So we have to, so that's, and you'll appreciate that. But in terms of, if you're looking, and it makes it sound like I'm not going to give you the data, which we will, but I'm putting loads of caveats around it, which is that, so if we look at, we have a really dynamic staffing model on our tube stations, which is responsive to passenger flows and passenger demands, particularly on platforms. So depending on the busyness of a platform will determine whether the number of staff are deployed on a platform versus in a gate line versus elsewhere in the station. So I think that you will struggle to correlate staffing levels and the presence of staff with the occurrence of crime, but we will share the location of crime data for the crime types where that information is held by our police partners. But yeah, what we can't do is provide staffing data probably to the level of granularity to the time that the crime occurred. But we will share. We'll share what we've got. Yeah.
That'd be really useful, because obviously we also know when your staffing model was changed from having people in ticket offices to in a fixed place to this more dynamic model, and we'd be very interested in before and after patterns there as well, I think. But yeah, thank you very much. So moving on, I wanted to go back to TravelWatch and discuss your scorecard, because that isn't just about TfL services. It ranks all the different transport providers according to their approach to passengers' personal security. So I wanted to ask, first of all, what was your rationale for devising this scorecard and the criteria you chose?
Thank you. So the reason we created this scorecard was we had a lot of interest in the first report that we published, a lot of really great conversations with transport operators and others about how we can kind of take action and implement the recommendations. But obviously a lot of these things are longer term, and we need to keep that conversation going, and we need to make sure things are actually being implemented. So we did this, I think it was just over a year on from the initial report, just to see what progress, in this case, transport operators had made. We used our recommendations just for consistency and broke it down into 6 general categories. And then in terms of that criteria, trying to use data-driven information as much as we could, so looking at things like CCTV, awareness campaigns, and staff training, again, just to build, I guess, a more holistic picture of how everything was progressing or not progressing in some instances.
Okay, great. And would you like to comment on the overall winners and losers here? Obviously, Transport for London did well in your criteria. The lowest in your scorecard was Grand Central, and then I noticed that you didn't get any answer at all to your questions from East Midlands, Eurostar, Thameslink, which is a shame for those of us who use it a lot, Heathrow Express, and Lumo. So can you comment on that?
Yep,
the
sure.
scores you gave, and also what might the reasons be for not responding to you?
Yeah, so you mentioned sort of the people who did well, so Network well, I think LNER, TfL, they did very well, and I think there was just a lot of recognition about the issue and sort of proactive work around that, and again, also something which is extremely important, working with sort of the impact groups as well throughout the work. I think where there are train companies who didn't do so well, I think some of that is partly around, I mean, there's a range of reasons. Some of it is just lack of engagement, or not a huge, it just doesn't seem to be a huge topic, or it's not high up on their agenda. I think there are also some structural issues. So, for example, around CCTV, we know some sort of rolling stock, and I know this is an issue across other services as well. It's just very hard and expensive to upgrade. So again, it's some things maybe will just take longer than a year to progress. The ones who didn't respond, obviously tried to engage with them. I will say around Thameslink, they did engage with the process. I think there was some sort of is more just in terms of getting the data that they were issued. So they did engage. It just wasn't able to be done within the time frame. So I will give them their due there. But I think there's also an element of, again, just needing to build up those relationships. It might be that they are doing stuff, but, you know, we need to engage with them further to find out what that is, or make sure that they're also letting the public know about what that is, because I think that's another aspect of it, is if you can show progress, that can hopefully build the public's trust and build their confidence to travel safely.
Okay, so you released this scorecard in June. What's the reaction been like from the operators? Are they engaging with you to make improvements in future?
Yes, genuinely they are. Again, I kind of touched upon where some groups where we don't necessarily have, that hasn't come to fruition or that. And I mean, we're very keen to engage with them, so our door's always open. But we have had a positive response from a lot of people. And again, I think there's been a lot of useful conversations about how we can keep driving it forward. Always a little bit of a bit mixed bag with these things, but I think we've been pleased generally with the results. And again, being able to open it up more widely, I think a lot of the focus has understandably been on women and girls and that side of safety. But again, making sure we're looking at it across demographics as well. A lot of the actions will help everyone. But there are also specific issues to different groups. So again, it's looking at the LGBTQ plus community, disabled people, people of colour, how everyone is impacted in different ways, and making sure, again, we can support everyone.
Okay, excellent. And then going back to things like staffing and quality of things that I would class as prevention. So there's obviously things that can help solve the crimes. Some things do a bit of both, like CCTV might deter crime as well as help solve it. But things that are purely prevention, like staffing and things like that. Are you considering adding more criteria that are more prevention focused? I think looking at the criteria, not to criticise your work, but looking at the criteria, it seems a lot of them are around what happens once there has been an incident as opposed to preventing it.
Yes, no, I think that's a really good point, and definitely something that we can look at including more of. Because again, I mean, not to sound cliched, but prevention is better than cure. So I think if there is more that can be done around that, I think at the moment a lot of the focus is on the sharp end, when, as you say, when something has been happening, but that is certainly something I think we could look at doing more of. And again, this is sort of part of a wider programme of work. So again, I think bringing in learnings from everywhere, again, just to strengthen the whole package, I think. Yeah.
Great, I think that would be fantastic. I think we were all pretty not taken aback, but impressed by the response to the ticket officers' consultation, and people's concerns about safety if the ticket officers were taken away was so clear. And I think that does mean there's an appetite for potentially pushing for the opposite to happen, for additional staff to be provided as well as things that are there to be retained. So I would really welcome that myself. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking on behalf of the committee there, but hopefully you're all nodding at me. Right, moving on to a question to everyone, but I'll start with you again, Alex, if that's all right. Your 2022 report recommended making public sexual harassment a crime, and on the 18th September 2023, the Protection from Sex-Based Harassment in Public Act 2023 bill received royal assent. What do you anticipate the impact of this will be? And that'll go to everybody after Alex.
So I think there are probably three key things that we hope the impact of this will be. One is making it much clearer for people who are victims of these crimes that it is a crime, and making it easier for them to seek support and help and get accountability for what's happened for them. I think there were some issues that were sort of falling through the gaps in sort of previous legislation, particularly things around leering, catcalling, those sorts of issues. I think the second point is that people, again, who are victims of this will get reassurance that their plight is recognised in law. And again, going back to reporting, two of the main reasons that women didn't report these issues was because A, they didn't think it was a crime, and B, they didn't think anything would happen of it. So again, I think this will go some way towards helping that. And then I think the third aspect is also just sort of sending a cultural message that these behaviours aren't acceptable, and hopefully that is something that will filter through, people get on board. Also, organisations can sort of build that into, for example, their training. Again, just kind of cementing the idea of what is okay and what is not okay, and hopefully it will also potentially open up more funding avenues for this if it's made a crime as well, so people will have more support to implement it as well.
Great, thank you. If I can move down along the line and ask for any further reactions, please.
And I'll remember to put the microphone on this time. I think it's excellent. I won't repeat what Alex has said, but I think it sends a message to offenders that it's being taken seriously. One of the big benefits, I think, is also in terms of data. BTP have been doing an excellent job of already investigating and having people charged for public order for sexual harassment offences, and they've done that through public order, but that's bespoke reporting and recording for us to be able to get that data. So it'll be much better for us when there's an offence, for the Met Police as well, for us to be able to get that data, understand the levels of what's coming forward, be able to track and understand where it's happening on our network so we can respond to it. So I'm a big supporter that anything that makes it easier for police to do their jobs and hold people to account for their behaviour is a good thing. So I'm looking forward to when it comes into force in January.
Thank you. Siwan, do you have any...
Well, probably nothing significant further to add to what Mandy's already said, but also I think it is, obviously we really welcome this, and as TfL with our police partners, we have been calling out behaviour that would now fall under this offence as being behaviour that we don't tolerate in our network. So we've been very proactive, and you'll know the level of feedback, let's call it, that we've received over, calling out staring as a behaviour, intrusive staring as a behaviour that makes women and girls feel uncomfortable, and is behaviour that we are calling out as an offence, alongside catcalling, alongside leering, alongside those other behaviours. So we're pleased to see legislation is catching up with the stance that we've been taking in London.
Excellent, thank you very much. DCS, Jessah, are you all set up to record this effectively now as well in terms
Not
of your
yet.
systems?
It will be happening very soon. So we are aware, and we have teams working to get the training and our IT systems ready for the change. And I would say, in addition to what has been said already, the key area I think this will help us do is better understand what's happening with the offenders, because we'll be able to record it better, we'll be able to do some preventative work with them and target our response to dealing with that much more appropriately. We'll have richer data as a result.
Okay, thank you. And Chief Superintendent Casey.
Yes, but the only thing to add is, I suppose it's just that fact we're waiting for the commencement regulations now for this to come into effect so that we can start using this specific legislation. I think at a simple level, the counting is going to help. It's going to make it clearer where we've got hotspots, for example. Move us on from this kind of flagging approach we're having to take with existing legislation. So that'll be really clear across forces. I think also, in addition to giving the public clarity, I think it'll give all of our people clarity. We've briefed, we've trained, people kind of get that. But when the law is very clear in this space, that makes it easier. And I think, as long as the commencement regulations and the guidance that goes with it calls out that specific behaviour and is very clear, which we believe it will be, that everyone will totally understand, what is acceptable and what is not, and what is prohibited in law. Because, definitely, as has been said, the campaigns around this, there is a fair amount of people that find it confusing, in terms of the legislation. They shouldn't, in terms of the behaviour, but this will make it incredibly clear, I think, and that'll be hugely helpful for policing, but also for people who are victims of this.
Okay, and then on to TfL specifically, are you planning further awareness campaigns about this sooner rather than later? Are you going to wait for the detailed guidance, or are you getting in with, by the way, this is a crime?
I think our campaigns already cover it, but what this will allow us to do is be much more stronger in our messaging. So it'll be, it's a criminal offence. At the moment, because some of it was in grey area, it's this behaviour is harmful, it's sexual harassment, will be able to be much stronger in our messaging. So our hate crime campaigns, our sexual harassment campaigns, we're continuing with those. They're a core part of what we do, and we'll continue to improve the messaging. But I'm really pleased there'll be clarity of message, not only for TfL. A lot of the boroughs are doing their own campaigns on this as well, with different kind of messaging. So we'll be able to have a more consistent voice and kind of send a clearer message, both to offenders, to victims, but also to bystanders, that we can do something if they report it to us.
Excellent, thank you very much. And then my final question was also to TfL, whichever one of you wants to answer. We want to ask, how is TfL learning from international research around personal safety on public transport systems?
This is a core part of what Siwan, our reporter Siwan, our team does. So particularly for violence against women and girls, hate crime and fare evasion, we work really closely with metros in other areas, learning and sharing best practice. So COMET, I think that's the community of metros. There's lots of sharing of information there about how to best tackle it. We work with other police forces as well. Chrissy and Chris's teams are involved in those discussions. So that's constant. That's not just with European cities. We're learning from Australia, sharing best practice with them, and also in the US. So key part of what we do.
Do you have any summaries or documents that you might release to us so we can learn more of what you've learned?
Yeah, I think one of the areas which I think one of your colleagues touched on, and we are putting, we've got some very recent kind of analysis and comparison, is in the area of fare evasion. Now, I know the focus of this committee is very much on crimes against our customers and antisocial behaviour. But in terms of that wider fear of crime and what contributes to a network feeling unsafe, we are acutely conscious at TfL that fare evasion and behaviour where it feels like that there's poor control of our network really contributes to feeling unsafe. So we've just recently done work which compares the levels of fare evasion and how we measure fare evasion in London compared to other cities, but also the interventions that we have in place and what's working well. So we can share that with you, as well as the previous work that's been done on violence against women and girls.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Sian, it's sometimes difficult in terms of measuring crime levels with other cities because it's measured differently, or they count different crimes.
Yeah, so we're not so much looking for the statistics, but the methods of dealing and making improvements. That's what we're looking for. Thank you very much.
We now move on to our next section, which is going to be led off by Assembly Member Pigeon. And welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Apologies, I have missed your session so far. I will have to play it back. It sounds like it's been really interesting. And apologies if I ask something that you've already said earlier, because I haven't been here. So apologies if you have to repeat something. I wanted to ask about the 2023 Active Bystander campaign. How are you tracking the impact of it? Because we can have things that look great, but how do you measure impact?
We're monitoring the crime stats as well. There's a number of issues that could be impacting on the crime stats, not just the bystander campaign, but a lot of development went into the bystander campaign. Initially from London TravelWatch, in terms of people needing clearer information, so there's lots of stakeholder engagement in how, and that continues. Our marketing teams, they track recognition of the campaign messaging, ensuring it's understood. That's all happening, but because it's quite difficult to isolate one campaign and the impact on that when we're doing so much in this area, but it's constant in terms of improving it, and it's not just the posters you see out on the network. There's a very comprehensive comms campaign that supports that. So where there's more space and we can go into issues and expand on particular issues affecting particular groups, we do that through editorial, through social media. So they'll be tracking all of that in terms of click-throughs and things like that to see how far the message has been reached, and then also Lad Bible, Pink News and media channels like that, they will provide some input about how effective it was, how much it was read, its reach, and all of that. So that's constantly being fed into our marketing teams, who are refining what we do, and then that informs our plan for how we communicate about bystander intervention.
Okay, and presumably that will all be pulled together at some point into a comprehensive report. But what about the actual number of incidents? You said you're looking at crime stats. Have you seen anything since the campaign launched? Any change, an increase?
Yeah, particularly for sexual harassment, we have seen a notable increase. And when a burst of campaign activity, you can see quite clearly an increase in reports. But as I said, there are a number of factors that are influencing that. But we can share the data with you. There has definitely been an increase in the number of... So once the campaign, the main campaign, Zero Tolerance to Sexual Harassment, went live in October, then there was a spike in terms of reports, which is positive, and we welcome that. And then when the bystander campaign, you can see some further increases there, but not to the same level as when the main campaign. But I'm not sure if you caught this part, Caroline, but the campaign is offender focused, the main campaign, so we're hoping that that's impacting on people's behaviour, and then underneath the reporting we're also seeing a change in people less likely to commit this, knowing that we're taking it seriously and someone's going to do something about it should they see it.
And people are keeping an eye out, you know.
So and Chris and Chrissy will emphasise this, but we do a lot of active listening, obviously through stakeholder groups and more broadly in terms of understanding the reach and impact of the active bystander messaging. And our colleagues as well do a lot of social media monitoring, where to see, and that helps us assess about the extent to which bystanders are getting involved. But I think you'll see, particularly in BTP data, the number of reports which are reports from people who witnessed something that happened, as opposed to the individual who was targeted, and we're starting to see sort of the change in trend in that. Chris, have you got data to hand?
Chris,
there's a few bits in this space that I wanted to, I suppose, draw out. So one is that there's some recent survey work with 2,000 women, and I think it's a third of them said they'd been sexually harassed during their commute. But we've now, and I'm not sure what the baseline was, but it was definitely significantly lower than this. We've got to the point in that sort of survey data where we're saying 51% of them are saying that somebody stepped in and there was a bystander intervention. Previously it would have been significantly lower than that. And also that day-to-day experience. So, for example, every day I look at our instances, they come in, we review instances of threat and harm. We look at all of the sexual offences that have happened, and it is even this morning looking at them, it's a common theme that we get reports from bystanders and not actually the victim sometimes. So actually there are regular occasions on a day-to-day basis where we get that sort of, somebody's intervened, they've been a bystander, and then they've reported it. But there is that trend in terms of people seeing more bystander interventions, the survey data, and as has been talked in terms of social media monitoring, etc., in that space, that I guess is leading us in the direction that campaign is working. I suppose my last point would be the Railway Guardian app again. When
we're going to come on to that next.
Okay.
So hold that thought. I'm not treading on colleagues' questions, so let's hold that thought. But are you then? I suppose it's too early to say about prosecutions from this, but have you got any that are in the system as a result of this?
In terms of, I haven't got that detail to hand. All I can say is, I think it was before you'd arrived earlier, the detection rate in terms of sexual assaults, doesn't always tell us the full picture. There is a part of it around, actually listening to victims more, I think, and being clearer than maybe we once were, that sometimes it is more of a, there are different outcomes that victims want. But for BTP, and in terms of, central London, our detection rate for sexual offences, it's kind of 15-16%, which doesn't probably sound great in the grand scheme, but there is a bit more context as described. But when compared nationally, that is a much better detection rate than we see across the country, I would say.
Okay.
If I could just add to that, I think there are real challenges for police when a bystander comes forward and they don't have a victim in terms of then investigating that fully unless there's really compelling evidence. So you will see some social media videos that go viral. The victim hasn't come forward to report that, but somebody on the train has then put that forward to BTP. BTP puts out, or the MAT will put out an appeal for information. Sometimes the victim comes forward and that will make it much easier. But there are real challenges if there isn't evidence and also there is no victim. But that is constantly informing the data. We're using that to analyse where the issues are, and then that's informing our prevention activity.
And Christina, you want to come in?
You took the words out of my mouth again, Mandy. So witness appeals and the response to witness appeals, particularly online, we've seen a distinct increase in the numbers that are coming through, and we think that's a result of the campaign. But also, when we have the campaigns, they're accompanied by walk and talk sessions with our officers and police PCSOs, and we're finding that the number of intelligence reports that are coming through as a result of that has increased. So we know that that's coming from bystanders who therefore are seeing the campaign, hearing about it, and are committed to supporting us with it.
Lovely, thank you for that. Can I come to you next, Alex, and ask from your 2022 report, one of the things you highlighted and was a recommendation was for transport operators to develop a playbook of good active bystander behaviour. Do you think this has now been achieved?
I think there's been a lot of really great work on this. I've already discussed some of the really positive campaigns. And again, just putting it out there so people have the knowledge and information that they need. So I think we definitely have made really good progress. I do think there is still potentially work to be done across the wider industry to make sure it's a unified message. We have seen, again, all good campaigns in their own right. But for example, I think there is some slight differences in the advice on some of the TfL campaigns to, for example, some on national train companies. Again, not that either of them are wrong, and it's all useful information for passengers, but it can just cause a little bit of confusion about, this one saying I should do this one saying I should do this, which one should I do? And again, we just need to make it as clear and easy as possible for people. So again, I guess that's just kind of making it even better. I think there is probably a bit more that could be done around that, not to, again, diminish the impact of the ones that have already been introduced, though.
And I just wanted to ask, and it may have been picked up before I arrived, so apologies, but obviously you've got the Active Bystander campaign, and back in 2021 your anti-sexual harassment campaign, both really helpful. What length of time are these going to run? Or are you going to rerun the 2021 one? And you said earlier, I caught Mandy, that you're continuing them and improving messages, but you presumably have funding for a set period, and then you want to analyse that to then... So can you just give me a flavour of that, please?
At this point in time, they're ongoing campaigns. We know how important they are. We know that, you have a burst of activity, you'll see a change, and then unless you sustain that, then you'll lose that increase in confidence or awareness of what to do. So at this point in time, as part of our End Violence Against Women and Girls programme and our hate crime work, those campaigns would continue. The sexual harassment campaign was developed in partnership with the Rail Delivery Group and our police partners. And I think that's been really helpful in terms of having clarity of message. Even though it's slightly different in look and feel, the message is very, very similar, and we've been able to amplify that message by having that across the national rail network. Our bystander messaging has been, we've grappled with it for a long time because there are particular safety risks with bystanders potentially intervening. So the advice we give is not to directly confront the offender. Safety is paramount. So some people will feel more confident and they will choose whether they want to, but our advice is to ignore the behaviour of the perpetrator and focus your attention. We know from lots of different evidence in transport and other areas that bystanders can play a really important role in preventing the incident or preventing the escalation of an incident by distracting or offering somebody a seat like that. And so that's where our attention is focused. But I don't think any of the messages are wrong. It's just, we needed to weigh up what was right for us and what we felt was right for our customers, which is don't directly approach the perpetrator.
Yeah, and what funding have you got? You said it's an ongoing campaign, but what funding have you secured? Because it costs money to run this sort of campaign, and then you'll need to refresh it and so on.
It's around £600,000 has been allocated to the End Violence Against Women and Girls campaign. And that is not just the posters on the network, that is podcasts, social media, editorial, all of that. There's significant effort. These are two of our biggest campaigns in TfL.
And that runs until when, that budget?
It's built into our business plan. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Siwan. Yes.
Which is for what period? Sorry.
So it's built into our next 5 years. Yeah.
Right.
So it's an ongoing commitment from Transport for London.
So 600,000 over 5 years.
With an inflationary increase, to the best of my understanding.
We can come back to you on the
600,000 a year or 600,000?
600,000 a year. So it's 620,000 next year. Or it could be slightly more further. Yeah. So it goes up each year. So there's an inflationary increase built into the campaign spend.
Wonderful. Lovely. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I now look to Assemblymember Garrett.
Morning. This is the much anticipated Railway Guardian app question. So I'm interested, Chris, what you've learnt from that app.
There's a huge amount. I think so. We introduced the tech system first in 2013, which I think was pretty revolutionary in terms of policing in the UK. That year on year grew and grew and grew, and you kind of get to a point where I suppose the tech system starts to feel slightly dated. So the Guardian app was the next progression for us in terms of it gave greater capability around sharing advice, giving the ability to report to train operators things that were concerns, but also to directly report to us. I suppose just in terms of a few of the headlines really, so we've had so far, so we launched in summer 2022, we've had 131,000 downloads so far, and then effectively we have had just over 8,000 clicks leading through to just over 1,000 structured text to BTP. So that's just the ability to kind of start a text message through that app. There's nearly 300 reports to train operators about things they probably wouldn't have reported before if it's lighting, if it's safety issues. So I think it's provided a great avenue for that. And then just shy of 2,000 clicks through to Single Online Home to our crime reporting. So again, it's putting everything in one place. It's giving all the guidance, advice, gives us a route to message out to communities and to people who've got the app, but also makes it really clear the ways in which you can report. And I think there's just a huge value to that. I think the next bit is about how do we kind of amplify that, and how do we, across all modes, start to think about that, and more broadly, maybe nationally. I think there's the simplicity of the app is incredibly helpful.
So roughly what proportion of reports come through the app?
I'm not sure.
I'm going to pin you down to like a fraction of a percentage, but is it like 10%, 50%, 80%?
Of reports in general to us, it's a fairly small proportion at the minute, I would say. We've been promoting it. Obviously, we get a bit of a boost in terms of some of the work that TfL and others do in terms of reporting campaigns and mentioning the Guardian app. But in that space, we haven't got a significant budget in terms of the marketing. So I think actually there is a challenge there that it's. The brand recognition is good, it's getting better, but there's still more to do in that space.
So on that, because obviously that's the issue, is that people don't necessarily know about it. Your focus is obviously on the railway, but for most people, a railway is like a small part of everything else they're doing in their day or their week. So do you have any sort of figures on roughly what public awareness is of the app? Or have you gone about finding out what people's awareness is?
Yes, I think I'm trying to remember the exact number. It's in here. It's around, I think, in terms of the survey work we've done, it was around the 30% mark, which again isn't terrible, but nowhere near what we need it to be. I think, and one of my earlier points, I guess, was there are bits that we need to think about. How do we make it more obvious? And some transport networks around the world, you will see. Reporting methods are very clear on public transport. There's a balance in terms of fear of crime, but potential opportunities around that and the ability to have stickers on windows, scan it, download the app for example.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I don't know if you know, this might be a very specific question, but I always think about use cases of things, how people use them, and I don't know if you know whether because one of the prompts for people to become aware of the app and download it and install it might be that they've just seen something they want to report and they go, oh, I'll get the app now. So I don't know if you have any stats on whether quite a lot of the reports very quickly follow somebody installing the app, or whether it's something that they go around with. I have a local government report it app, which I have all the time, and it allows you to GPS tag photos, and they automatically go to whichever your local authority is you happen to be in.
I know the one you mean. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm just curious, what's the predominant use case? Is it just people think, oh, I should report that, then they find the app and use it, or do you know?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we've got the data in that way to be able to demonstrate that. But it is a good question, and we'll take that away.
Yeah. I don't know. I suppose. Thanks, Chris. Think about TfL. Is that something that TfL have thought about, looked at, discarded, planning?
I'll start, and then do our double-handed act, and Mandy can come in. So clearly we recognise that the ease of reporting is really important to people feeling safe and secure, and the data that comes through reporting is really vital for us to both take action against offenders, but also to inform our preventative work, to inform our messaging, to inform the deployment of our own staff in terms of tackling concerns about fear of crime. But as has been highlighted here, we did set aside money in our Ending Violence Against Women and Girls programme to look at developing a reporting app. But then we wanted to monitor and see the impact of the Railway Guardian Act. But as demonstrated here, in terms of thinking about journeys across London, we have the Met Police policing the London streets. We have the Road and Transport Policing Command dedicated to policing London's bus network, taxi and private hire, and tackling road danger on the road. We have the BTP policing our rail and underground networks. So what's vital to us, I suppose, when we think about the reporting app is how can we have a simple, single, easy, accessible point by which people report, but most importantly that then that information goes to the right authority and organisation, but is shared more broadly so that we are all able, but that the authorities that are able to act on that information have it, and then all of us have a greater awareness, so it supports our collaborative efforts. So we are monitoring the impact of the Railway Guardian App. We're looking more broadly at what's happening across the Met and seeing where we as TfL can really can bring some great, add some value and a contribution to this. As you've already referenced, there is a bit of a plethora of reporting sites. Mm-hmm. We don't want to add into that into that field. So we want to really see where we can make a difference. Obviously, we do encourage reporting across our network, in our signage, on our websites and elsewhere, but it's through those existing channels rather than adding into it. Do you want to come in?
We will be looking at this as part of our End Violence Against Women and Girls programme. I think the Railway Guardian app is fantastic, and we get people are always praising it, and there's a lot of work by BTP and partners to promote that app. There is something that I think that we can do in TfL, whether it's reporting functionality, I'm not going to say an app, but we can make it clearer for customers, regardless of where they're travelling and what modes, how to report, and then direct them through to the right channels. We're also very conscious that, and we hear from our customers, sometimes they'll report an incident to TfL, and we'll know it's a crime, and then they're encouraged to report that directly to the police, so the police can then investigate it properly. So there is a role, I think, for TfL to make it easier so that they could potentially report once, but then it goes to the right places. So we'll look at that, and we'll work really closely with our police partners. We don't want to duplicate effort, and what we definitely don't want to do is confuse customers about what to do and where to report. So that just needs much more consideration about the best way to do that.
Yeah, you sort of anticipated what I was thinking. I mean, so the local government reporting app I mentioned, the benefit of that is that you don't have to know which borough you're in. I'm afraid I'm one of those people who does tend to know, but normal people don't necessarily know which borough or which county or whatever they happen to be. And you use the same app and it figures out in the background. And obviously this is not a new problem. The 999 number was brought in so that people wouldn't have to know, what was the phone number for their local police station. I'm just concerned with the proliferation of apps that we just go full cycle, and eventually somebody says, hey, maybe we should have one system for reporting it, and then in the background there's a system that works out who needs to know. And so that's not a criticism of the Railway Guardian app. I'm in favour of people taking initiative and taking a lead, but so TfL is looking at something that's
That's definitely an area that we want to explore more with our police partners. But, there is a place for Railway Guardian, absolutely. And it's not just a reporting app, it's a safety app, and there's lots of really excellent information in there about bystander intervention, some reference guides, should you be a victim. It's excellent. But I think that there is a way that we can integrate it and work better for our customers so they don't need to figure it out. But in the background, if somebody reports to the wrong police force or through the wrong channel, the police work that out in the background and either direct them to the right place or do it between them, pass the crime over. But in the front end, I think that there's more that we can do. We want to know as well. Some of it, they may be making a complaint about a particular thing to TfL, but at the same time, there's a crime also in what they've told us. So sometimes these reports do need to go to both places, and we'll try and make that easier as we move forward.
Okay. I see, Chris, you wanted to come in. I'm gathering your light coming on is that. But just quickly before I do, did you give a sort of timeline? Presumably there's no timeline of what TfL are working on. It's a sort of thing that you're thinking about that hasn't yet reached a conclusion.
So we have an End Violence Against Women and Girls programme. The budget for that is just being looked at now. We're doing some in-depth research with women and girls who travel on our network about what they're expecting TfL to do and some of the issues, and I'm sure reporting will come out through that. So we hope to learn from that, and that research will then inform our pipeline of actions going forward over the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, great. Chris?
Just a quick couple of points, because Mandy touched on it in terms of reporting to the police, and this is where most forces now use a single website. In a sense, we've all got our individual websites, but single on our home. So the ability actually to direct that crime report to the right force has been a big step forward. And I think it's same in terms of Guardian. We've kind of broken that new ground. I do think it is building on what we've done already as opposed to replicating or duplicating. And obviously some of that success was with Home Office funding initially, and there is a great deal of interest across other forces and I know across London to look at ways do we build on that as opposed to saying let's have another app. I don't think that's the intention.
Yeah.
We have
Chris,
many apps.
The app does tell you when you've left the railway network and you're in another police jurisdiction that you're now in Metropolitan Police area, and therefore any issues here report to them. So it does that.
Okay. I don't know whether you want to add anything to that, Christine, or whether the Met, or you feel
I need to say that some of the reports that do go to the Guardian app do end up coming to us. So actually, it is working. Yeah.
Well, that's positive. Thank you. That's good to hear. Alex, just a quick final question. I know in your 2022 report, much discussed this morning, one of the recommendations was about a sort of cross-industry app task force. That sounds like the sort of thing that'd be on the thick of it, doesn't it? What progress have you seen on that, or what are your thoughts? Now reflecting on that report and what's happened subsequently.
I think. A lot of the sort of reasons for this have been discussed. So again, anything that you can do to make reporting easier for people is a positive. And what a lot of people were telling us is, an app would be something that is useful and would help them report. So it's, we welcome the Guardian app, and it's all great and very positive. But again, it's that risk. If everyone has a different app, are people going to bother downloading it? Will they know which one to use? Will it inadvertently make it more difficult? So I think it sounds really positive. Kind of TfL's approach to this is making sure. What you ultimately want is almost a one-stop shop. If something's happened, I guess a bit like your local government app, where you can just go to here. It will filter through to the right organisation, and action will be taken. Because again, it's the structure in terms of who polices which mode. Valid reasons for it, but a lot of people on the street, they're not going to know, I'm on a bus, so it's the Met, or I'm on the Overground, so it's the BTP. So again, it's just taking that out of the equation and just having one place to do that. So again, I think this would be a really good avenue if they could go down to just having one place for people to go to.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex.
I was going to add then, not everyone wants an app as well. So I think that the choices are really, really important. And so we need to make it simpler, but still give people the choices if they don't want to download an app beforehand.
Okay, great.
Just briefly to echo that, completely agree. A lot of people don't even have sort of smartphones or internet access. So again, this is a really important step. But again, it's also maintaining non-digital routes for people to report as well.
Yeah, and I probably should just put in my standard plug, actually. So if you think about journey planning, which is the other area of many apps, the thing that TfL does is make the data public so that people don't have to use the TfL app. Obviously, they can if they wish, or they can use Citymapper or something else. And actually, that open data standard is an important part of the whole ecosystem. Let's call it that. Okay, sorry, Christine.
Just to add, in terms of plugs, so the new Net for London plan, we have got a victims portal in development at the moment, which hopefully go live last quarter of 24, which will mean it's not just used for reporting, but also for victims to check on progress updates and actually find out what's happening with their case without having to actually pick up the phone and try and get through to an officer as well.
Oh, that does sound very positive.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thanks for mentioning that and letting us know. That's it from me, Chair. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. And I downloaded the app after the briefing we had last Friday that Assemblymember McCartney, myself and Assemblymember Russell attended, which was really, really useful looking at this whole area. And when you look at it, you know, it's got in it, send a message via SMS, which is what I have done in the past to BTP, report a crime online using your website, Crime Stoppers, report a station issue with a train operator, street safe reporting. So it obviously then sends whatever off to different areas. Is there not a place to not recreate that, but for example on TfL Go app, which I rather like, others don't, but that's fine, that you could just have something there which ultimately clicks through to whatever's going on behind here? So you don't have to recreate that, it's just the front cover.
That's exactly what we're looking at.
So I just think that's the way to do it,
That's
isn't
exactly, I mean, there is a place for apps and with all the
And you've
additional
got this app
information
there, yeah.
and functionality, but what we would like to do in a travel app that people are relying, TfL Go, I use that as well, or City Mapper, that you are directed through, and I'm not a technical person in any way, but something quite simple in terms of an interface. I want to report this to TfL, or I want to report it to the police, or I want to report to both. And find a way to do it, but embedded in travel.
Seems to me the money's been spent and invested in the app and the back office behind it, and it's clearly working because you're all receiving the different reports. So actually, it's about just that link, as it were, on the front page, if we can call it that, of all these apps, is the way to deal with it. I would have thought. And is that
you could be in our focus group to see how it works.
Lovely. I'd love to be, because I'm clearly clearly someone who's neutral in all this. But no, I think that's probably the way to do it. But if that's what you're looking at, that's great. That's all I wanted to ask. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So I've got a couple of questions about staff, transport staff on the network. And firstly, this is to anyone who wants to come in on it. What specific training is provided to staff in regard to dealing with sexual harassment and hate crime on the network? Here are TfL guests. Want to jump in?
So if I start with sexual harassment, we have worked with our police partners and the rail delivery group to develop a bespoke training course for zero tolerance to sexual harassment. All of Siwan's operational staff in our directorate have been trained, bus operations have been trained. The thousands of office staff on London Underground, they're being trained as part of their annual assessment, so we're bringing them in. It's harder to release them from their operational duties, so we've got a programme that will get people through. And then in addition to that, training, equality and inclusion training for bus drivers has now started, and that's different. It's not a bespoke sexual harassment training course, but that's covering scenarios related to sexual harassment, but also to hate crime. And as I said, that started this month. So a real focus on it, and we're trying to get that through our enforcement officers. It's mandated that they have sexual harassment safeguarding training and the did I say hate crime? Sorry, but all areas it's covered as part of their core training. But in the interim, because it is a logistical challenge to get as many staff through, we have a big employee comms push where we're constantly giving messages to our staff, giving briefings on what we would expect them to do, but giving them some context about the issues and why they're important. But at the core of it is to support our customers and to report to the police. And we're trying to give our staff the confidence and the skills to be able to handle those situations, which, as Alex said, can be really difficult for the victim, but also for our staff who may not come across it that often. So give them the skills and the confidence to deal with those issues with compassion. but with the urgency that they require. Not all of our customers want the police involved, but it's still important that our staff know to report that incident to the police so that we know it happened, and it informs our deployment. But it's an ongoing commitment from TfL that our staff will have the training they need to do their jobs effectively.
Thank you. Thanks. And in terms of, to our Met and BTP guests, in terms of the people you have dealing with sexual harassment and hate crime, what training do you give them in order to do that, on the network, obviously?
So we have a round of professional development days, which all staff and officers who work on the road and transport network have probably every quarter, which at the last round focused on vulnerability. So it will be sexual harassment, but also vulnerability and all its guises, and then bespokely looking at time of day, where we recognise that people actually become more vulnerable for different reasons, and things like the age of the potential victims as well, or the hotspot location, which might actually bring in a vulnerability. So they're the kind of areas we look at, but it also expands to the points that Mandy's already touched on in terms of diversity and equality training, and how individuals can be particularly vulnerable because of a protected characteristic.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, just touch on the rail staff side first, if I may, and it's just about the point about the safeguarding on rail scheme, and that is something that obviously the London Underground is accredited in that space, and that's one of the things that, you know, he's part of it, is looking at that training, it's thinking about the vulnerability side of things, and it's just to draw out, in that space, we've seen a significant increase. So there's 12 train operators across the country, plus LU, who are now accredited, and we're working with other modes around getting them accredited. But a significant increase in terms of vulnerability reports from rail staff, so that's about 20% increase we've seen, and we have seen hundreds and hundreds of interventions in terms of mental health and suicide prevention. So there's just that wider piece around the rail staff training. I think we are seeing some huge benefit in that space. In terms of our people, we're in the process at the minute for all of our frontline police officers rolling out Nightingale training, so in terms of that first response to sexual offences, and then also a specialist sexual assault investigators course for all of our detectives. There's a range of other stuff going on in that space. People will have had training when they started, but it's part of our VORG strategy at the minute that we're refreshing all of that training for everyone on the front line and all of our detectives.
That's really helpful, thank you. And thanks for mentioning the safeguarding and rail scheme, because I was going to just come on to that in a second. Can you just describe the process by which organisations can achieve that accreditation?
Yes, so there's 5 criteria through which initially it started off as a DFT mandate for some operators, BTP being part of the assessment and criteria, and we, through our Designing Out Crime and Safeguarding team, work with individual operators to assess them against those criteria and to dig into the quality, as opposed to, I think sometimes we can look at, I don't know, CCTV or certain vulnerability training, but how good is it? So actually not just that people have done it, tick, how good is that training and how helpful? So the 5 criteria just briefly are senior leadership and commitment, there's safeguarding communications, responding to vulnerability, staff recruitment roles and responsibility, and that includes things like vetting and making sure there's consistency, and then training that's available to staff. And it's against all of those criteria we assess if an operator is accredited in terms of safeguarding on rail. Some haven't met that criteria initially, most kind of in that space, but we work with them, and actually my experience has been it's very much an education piece, I think, for some operators, and they found that actually we're setting a bit of a baseline, describing, what good looks like, and operators generally are very, very keen to work with us and to get that accreditation.
I'm sure so. Thank you. That's really helpful. And sticking with Chris and Christina, back to the staff training, and it was interesting what you're talking about, the quality of the staff training. TravelWatch's November 2023 report, I'm sure you've seen, recommended that staff training is co-designed with people from the LGBTQ+ community. Is this something you plan to adopt not only for LGBT+ people, but obviously for other communities as well? Christina?
Very simply, yes. And in some places it's happening already, as we, particularly with our BCU colleagues that we work with quite closely, they have people from the LGBT community come in to support the work that happens in training. So yes.
Sure, thank you.
Very similar, and as I mentioned earlier, last year our neighbourhood policing teams that cover the underground and the TFL modes, we delivered training through Gallup, and that's in terms of the LGBT plus community, but generally, and particularly in terms of the VORG work, work really closely with third sector groups, so that the training is co-designed, but we're always keen to do more in that space and to hear from people with lived experience.
I'm sure TravelWatch will be keeping an eye on that. Thanks very much. Moving slightly on to coming back to TFL, we're talking about again perception of safety and how safe passengers feel on the network, and how that affects it. My perception is that particularly around sexual harassment, then having visible women working on the network is really important. Siwan, what's the proportion of women who are working in sort of visible roles on the network? Do you have that information? Do you feel that it is something that makes an impact both on the perception of safety and then whether women might report those crimes? I'm going to ask you. Yes, sorry.
So I don't have. Sorry, no, I don't have that data in terms of across all our frontline staff, both within bus drivers, across our stations, as well as the enforcement staff that I deploy across the network. I don't have to hand the percentage of women. I'm looking at Mandy, who knows everything. And absolutely recognise the importance of diversity across our frontline, and how that's it's a symbol of London. It's a symbol of TFL that we are a place that that welcome everybody, and clearly we train all our people to be equipped and capable, to be compassionate, to be empathetic with our customers, and to report as Mandy's already outlined. But I did want to take this moment to highlight one of the recent developments that we've taken as Transport for London, and I hope that you will have seen this, that we've started deploying across our rail, underground and bus network our own transport support and enforcement officers. So they are visible, they are diverse, and they are deployed across our network, and their purpose is to be that very visible, protective presence, acting as capable guardians. And I think the percentage of and we've really set out to encourage women to apply for those roles, to look at family-friendly, flexible kind of shift patterns and models of working, to really encourage people who've got caring responsibilities into those roles, to be really think very, very hard. And we've got really strong diversity amongst that 140 or so transport support enforcement officers that we're currently deploying. But yeah, you're absolutely right to highlight it, and it's something that is very much a priority for us, as it is for our policing partners, to encourage the diversity and a broader range of women into roles and across senior leadership positions.
Yes. No, absolutely, and just to recognise the wonderful diversity of the panel today. So just coming on to Chris and Christina, it's a similar question really, because I don't mean to obviously anyone can have empathy for somebody in a difficult situation. The problem is you can't see empathy. Do you know what I mean? You don't actually know, and a shortcut is to feel that you may be more able to talk to certain people, and that's why that diversity is so important. So just recognising. But so Chris and Christina, do you have well, I'm sure you do know these figures somewhere, but can you comment on that? And do you have those figures in terms of the visible staff on your visible staff on the network?
So I can say for the whole command, it's about 35% split women to 65 male. However, I can't say for the team that work on the transport network specifically, but I can absolutely get that information for you.
That would be really, really interesting, yes, Chris.
Yeah, so for BTP, particularly female representation is incredibly poor. So we've the lowest female representation in the country. If you look at police forces, it's something that we've been working hard on. Obviously now, not that this would change everything, but we've got female chief constable, our first female chief, Lucy Dorsey, and actually we are seeing a real clear commitment to improve the representation. So hopefully people might have seen, for example, we've just launched our part-time officer recruitment, and it's the first time we've done it. I think we're probably maybe the second or third force in the country that's done it, to start as part-time. So actually not that you have to travel to London for 16 weeks, potentially be away from your family, train for that entire time, and then effectively stay full-time for the best part of 2 years before you then become part-time. So we're saying part-time from the start effectively, and we think that will help, but there's a range of other activity we're taking, but yeah, it's not a great position for us, and we're definitely committed to improving that representation.
That's really interesting, helpful, and yeah, big plug for people to apply, women to apply to join BTP. Thanks very much for that. Now coming on to, again, it's something I touched upon earlier on about safety, people feeling safety, passengers feeling safe late at night. So again, referring back to London TravelWatch's report from 2022 found that 73% of passengers believe that late at night is the least safe time to travel. So what is specifically being done to improve safety on the transport network at night?
So I'll start, and I'm sure my colleagues will come in.
Thank you.
Eager to go. So just I'm going to highlight two elements of this. And obviously, we recognise, and we all experience this. I mean, we all feel more afraid at night. So it's it is in human nature. But one long-standing intervention and one recent intervention. So we, with our partners in the Met and BTP, by recognising the extent to which people do feel more fearful at night and are more likely to use door-to-door transport as well. So the role of taxi and private hire vehicles particularly comes into its fore in terms of safe nighttime travel, because people don't want to be out on the street. So we've run called the Safe Travel at Night campaign. And Safe Travel at Night campaign is a multi-dimensional campaign that, and I think Chrissy's already mentioned it, but it's the proactive engagement of our officers being visible across the Met and TfL, being visible at night, engaging with people on their way out, making helping people plan their journey home, making sure that people have really strong safety tips, but also gathering together a significant amount of intelligence about those individuals who threaten our transport users. So we do a lot of proactive enforcement during that time as well. So I'm sure colleagues will come on and talk in more detail about safe travel at night work. It does involve working with volunteer groups like Night Stars in Westminster. It does involve working with all the nightclubs. It's the active part by which we implement the Mayor's night safety charter, so it's a really vitally important campaign for us. But in addition, I did want to highlight the previous plug I gave for the development within TfL, Transport Support Enforcement Officers. We are just about to launch our first night team of TSEs to be deployed across the rail, underground and bus network. And our TSE officers, their purpose is to be capable guardians on the network, to be visible and reassuring, to protect our colleagues on the front line from the risk of workplace violence and aggression. And we know that our colleagues working at night also feel very fearful about working at night. They feel more isolated. Although the risk of being a victim crime is actually is very, very low. Our highest volume crimes happen at a time when our network is most crowded. But actually, we really need to give that visible reassurance presence to protect our colleagues at night, but also to tackle antisocial behaviour and to safeguard some of those people who are vulnerable at night. And we know there's vulnerability at night that comes from people who are sleeping rough on our network. We know there's vulnerability at night which comes from people with mental health issues, and there's vulnerability which I'm sure many people in this room have experienced that comes from intoxication, and that's made more acute at night. So they have a really distinct and purposeful role to play to look at safeguarding and supporting our customers and protecting our front line. And you will see the night team out and about, and we'll be doing a huge amount of publicity about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Thanks, Christina.
you've already spoken about Opstan, but the key here in terms of our campaign is also encouraging people to think about their route home before they leave. So they've got a range of options, but also they are aware of what challenges they may come up against as they're travelling, and having lots of high-vis patrols and people from my teams in the hotspot areas where we've got intel that tells us there could be issues or where previous offences have occurred. So we have people and officers and staff in the right place for those who will need us.
Thank you.
I suppose just to build on it from a B2P perspective, using all of that data, being very data-led in terms of where our patrols are, but I think the bit that Siwan mentioned about the TSEs having night night commitments coming up and actually working with them on Night Tube. And I think for us, there's a couple of points to draw out. One is, that the amount of crime we record on Night Tube is very low. So on average, it's 4.8 crimes recorded on a Night Tube night. Again, it's going to be the same as anything, that there is an element of underreporting, but that is in comparison to the what people might perceive is a very low number. And I think the work with the TSEs will help us in terms of our resource is stretched. There is a lot of high harm crime that we are seeking to focus on in terms of violence, robbery, etc. TSEs working in partnership, and a plug for the team who have been really positive addition, I think, to the network. So that ability to be really clear about who's going to approach and deal with what issue. We work collectively, but certain skills and teams are better suited to certain work around reassurance, for example, and then we can spend more time focusing on the high harm crime effectively.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And just following, mentioned the Night Tube, have you seen changes in the number of cases being reported since the Night Tube has come back into service? Oh.
I can jump in at a higher level in a sense. We can send further details afterwards if it's helpful.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
But so broadly, obviously, when during COVID, when there wasn't the network in the way that it was, obviously no crime. It has started to come back, but actually the numbers from the last time I looked at it was interestingly lower, I think, than it was before. And I do think part of that is as we're developing and evolving our approach and our hotspot patrolling, etc., and where we're targeting and the tactics we're using, that I think that is playing a part. So we've not seen a significant increase, for example. In fact, is same, or I think actually probably lower than it was pre-COVID.
And theft is the issue, the main issue in night crime, Night Tube crime, as well. Obviously, there's antisocial behaviour that happens on that we have BTP on there to help us deal with antisocial behaviour as well.
Thanks. Thank you. And just before I hand back to the chair, I've just got one more, which is relates back to, as you were talking about night travel and door to door. So it reminded me of some correspondence I've recently had with TfL about taxi and private hire drivers and whether we know how many are women. And actually, the fact that when I was growing up in a different model of private hire, there used to be women-only cab firms. And that's not something that people really have the option of now. Is that something that, actually I know there are huge amounts of checks and balances on private hire taxi drivers, and they would want me to say that, and it's definitely a safe mode of travel, but certainly some women want that opportunity. Is there any way of us making that happen, do you think? I think it's something we might we come back to in a future Transport Committee, but is that something that we can that is possible in the current mode of private hire, do you think?
This is not quite my area of expertise.
No, it's not. I'm being a bit cheeky, apologies.
But I think it's a really interesting area, which is both in terms of encouraging more women to join as drivers,
absolutely.
and obviously there are women drivers, but they are
spread thinly, I would say.
It's a very low percentage, and obviously it is a very flexible way of working. But also, I'm just thinking, and we have a passenger safety forum coming up with all the representatives of the taxi trade and the big private hire operators and some of the smaller operators as well, and the trade unions that represent private hire drivers. That's coming up a week on Monday. So we will take this question to them, but because I'm thinking particularly what we want to do is whether you can specify for a female driver when you make your booking, and that's and I'm not aware that functionality is available.
I know.
But I'm going to
you would have to have more women drivers to do it, to be honest. But I know that the taxi trade and the private hire would love to have a more diverse more diverse set of drivers. So it's something maybe we can all have a think about. So thanks. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Now look to Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you. That was a really interesting question. Thank you very much. So I want to ask some questions about CCTV, and I want to put that into a little bit of context first, if that's all right. So if you know some of my work, you'll know that I'm not the kind of Assembly member who will just throw surveillance at all policing questions. Like, I'm very interested in privacy. But I have been following the inconsistency in the retention times for CCTV footage for some time now. And I asked about it first in 2017. I followed it up again in 2020. And London TravelWatch put it as one of their recommendations in their 2022 report, acknowledging that still, and I say, like, I asked about this in 2017 and was assured that the efforts would be made to make it more consistent. But on different parts of the transport network, it can be 2 days that CCTV footage is retained for, and in other parts it's the more normal length of 28 days. So can I ask TfL, what are you doing to increase the consistency and standardisation of CCTV retention times, please?
So, Sean, you will know that we don't talk publicly about the retention time of CCTV because it's vital for us that we don't create an environment. Well, it's vital for us that, you know, the environment that we're seeking to create, we want to make hostile to offenders. We don't want to inadvertently give information which could be used against us. So, in terms of public discussion about retention times and varying retention times between different types of modes and different camera networks and different ages of cameras, I'm not going to go into detail, and we've been instructed by the DFT not to talk about this publicly.
Can you acknowledge, though, that
but
in some parts of the network, it could be, if you're attacked somewhere on the network, it may be as short as 2 days before that CCTV footage expires. Because if that could be anywhere, then people need to know they've got 2 days to report it, because there's a chance it could be gone.
So our commitment is in line with the standards that have been set by the Home Office. Is that all CCTV should be the minimum retention period should be 31 days, and that's the standard we're looking to complete across all our modes and across all our CCTV. And obviously, we have a significant CCTV infrastructure. Some of it slightly more aged and in need aged in other areas, but we have a program underway to upgrade the condition of our assets and to improve the availability and retention of CCTV across the piece.
Great, but can I just go back to my first question? I asked you this in 2017. You had a program underway then. That was the answer. What progress has been made, and how soon before we can be confident that it'll be all kept for a month?
I can't give you an indication of timescales, but as Siwan said, a new standard came into place this year, which means all new CCTV systems must have a retention period of 31 days, which is the Home Office standard. As part of our End Violence Against Women and Girls programme, we had some funding available about whether we could expand the retention periods for on-station CCTV, so retrospectively expand that. So that work is in place now to see what we can do. We don't have the budget to replace all CCTV at one time, but as the systems are due to be replaced, upgraded, then we'll take every opportunity we can to bring them into the 31 days.
And then the other thing I asked about, at the time, was can you publicise this? Now, Siwan, you've pushed back on publicising the fact that it may be a short period of time, but there's no sense of urgency in some of your communications, and I think there is a delicate balance between pushing people who may need time to process something before they report it, but just awareness that there is an expiry time, because I've been in contact with many people who've said, I took time to process it and I came and reported it, but it was only a few days, and I found that the CCTV had gone. And so just knowing that there may be a time limit before vital evidence is lost would be helpful.
And you'll have heard all of us speak this morning about how important it is that people do report. So we want to do we don't want to put up any obstacles to people reporting and people sharing with us what they've experienced on our network, and we can use that data and information and insight. Even if someone reports years later and the CCTV is not available, it's still important that we know that. So and we recognise that obviously CCTV is an incredibly important tool to support the investigative efforts of our policing partners, and I'm sure our policing partners will want to come in on this topic. But it's not the only tool either. We have other sources there are other sources of evidence that can support an investigation, whether it's from witnesses, whether it's from staff, whether it's from the ticketing and data systems that we have on our network. So we are a data-rich environment, and there's lots and lots of opportunities to support investigations over and above CCTV. So I know, and I really understand why it's done this. But for us, what really matters is that we make it as easy as possible, and that people report and share with us what they've experienced.
Sure. I mean, thank you. And obviously, this applies to all crimes, but I'm dwelling on the sexual offences, because quite often there will not be witnesses, and so the CCTV is even more important in those cases. So I do want to turn to the police now. Chris, you've put your lights on already, so we'll start with you.
It's my little indicator. Yeah.
But Christina, we'll come to you afterwards. Can I ask what your views are on this? To what extent are short retention times an issue for you, and are you able to help in any way to boost retention times?
Yes, I think the short retention periods where they exist, it is inevitably a challenge, like you've described, if somebody reports later. I've not seen, although I have commissioned recently some work around, what is the impact, what does that number look like, so that would be helpful for us. But, through working with TfL, I am getting a very positive sense that the lengthening and standardisation of those retention periods is something that they are committed to. I think the bigger challenge for me is more about the quality of the CCTV, and Siwan alluded to it. That some of the network is particularly ageing, some of the quality of CCTV is particularly poor. There are financial challenges, but that is probably more of a inhibiting factor for us. Is good quality images of individuals, so that we can look to detect those offences. And my last point on the sexual offences side of things is often those offences happening on train, actually they're committed in places where it's quite challenging anyway, even with the existing CCTV, to see what's happened, and that's where some of our other tactics in terms of our plainclothes teams and the work that they do helps. But quality of CCTV, and as Siwan has alluded to, is probably my biggest concern from a policing perspective.
Okay, thank you. And then Christina?
So in addition to the length of time it's held and also the quality, I'd say for my teams the biggest concern is out-of-hours provision. So particularly if we talked about travel at night time, if an incident happens at night and we want to get the investigation started, that would be a significant issue for my teams at the moment.
Excellent. Okay, and that
Assembly member
goes on to my very final question. Right. Thank you, Chair.
Could I just stop you 1 second, please?
Why?
Assembly member.
I've really don't like being interrupted.
I'd just like to welcome the Mayor of the Konge, who's arrived here today. Thank you very much. You're very welcome. He's the Mayor of Mitianda, near Kampala, Uganda. He's in the public gallery. Thank you, sir, for coming. And can I say Oliocha to you? Oh. Thank you.
Apologies, Chair. I thought you were hurrying me. We're not behind time or anything, are we? Good. Right. I do have a further question for the two representatives of the police. So I'm also aware of incidents where the police have not asked in time for CCTV. I just wanted to ask if you have, we talked earlier on about resources, have you got good processes in place for making sure that vital evidence is asked for in time, particularly given the slowness with which we're moving towards a standardised, slightly longer retention time?
So in our TPC, we've actually expanded our team in the last year to be able to process inquiries quicker. So I would say yes, we in terms of resources, what we need is victims to tell us if they think it may have been covered by CCTV as soon as they know, and the investigators to tell us if they think it would be helpful. But I don't see an issue with the size of the team at the moment. The challenge is, as I've said, the quality of the footage and also what to do when it happens on a bank holiday or at night time, for example.
Just from a B2B perspective, in some ways easier because we've got a 24/7 CCTV team that operates, so for access to CCTV across the network. But again, those teams and operational teams, there is stretch, and ultimately we have to prioritise the high harm crime. So sex offences, for example, if we have to make those difficult decisions, they would be at the front of that queue effectively.
That's really interesting. Do you have any standards set for the rate at which you ask, the speed and rate with which you ask for evidence that might exist, and any sort of tracking of how you're meeting those standards?
We will have that data. I haven't got it to hand.
Obviously.
It's all kind of that golden hour principle, and particularly in terms of robbery, sex offences, and like I say, the high harm crime. We've got something called Operation Blockade, which is that almost immediate activity for our team at Ebury Bridge, who will, instances like that come in, they will be immediately trying to get access to that CCTV, and if they don't have direct access, getting those requests in. So generally, it's as long as we've got enough information, and sometimes because it's online reports, there's challenges around getting sufficient detail. But as soon as we've got that, generally, on the day of report, we would be requesting the CCTV.
Okay, thank you. Mandy, did you want to speak?
I was just going to add, accepting some of the limitations in some of the systems having a lower retention period. BTP's CCTV team resources know that, and those ones will get pushed through. And that's on the back of some of the feedback that the request came in quite late. So there's a lot of work that's been happening in terms of processes to make sure that that comes over as quickly as it can, particularly for those higher harm offences around sexual offences.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. That's really good. Thank you.
Could I, sorry, just very briefly, add one thing? I think retention times and lengthening that is really important. A lot of that's been discussed. I think as well, just going back to the processes and people getting that CCTV, I think there's also sometimes issues. You should say it sometimes take people time to process what's happened to them and get in touch. But they also might not necessarily know who to get in touch. So, they might not necessarily want to go to the police, for example. So we've had instances where people have gone direct to the transport operator, maybe through channels that weren't specifically designed for this, and then even if they've maybe been in touch within the timeframes, by the time their query's been seen or responded to, it's then too late. So I think it also needs to kind of look at if there's a way to also review those sorts of things, identify where it is a sort of time-sensitive CCTV request and prioritise them as well.
And that's within the transport operators themselves. That's a recommendation. Okay, thank you.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. Obviously, there's been a very high-profile alleged crime on the Tube network recently, where my Assembly colleague Susan Hall believes she was pickpocketed, and she's talked about that quite publicly. So I feel I can ask this question. And it's probably to Chief Superintendent. Can I ask, was a formal report made, and are you doing all you can to get the CCTV footage and actually look into this allegation?
I think, definitely it's out there, it's public. I probably don't think I would be able to answer the question around whether it has been reported in terms of GDPR type restrictions, but I can talk generally about cases like that. If we've got sufficient information, we would do that. I think often, and maybe as has been described publicly in this case, there is an element where it most likely looks like a loss as opposed to a theft. But that's the challenging environment of theft and pickpocketing, that people just generally aren't that sure as to when it happened, and there can be confusion around it. And that's part of why it is a challenging crime for us to solve effectively.
Yeah, thank you. And I think my colleague Susan Hall said that there was an incident that she believed that there was someone fumbling next to her. So presumably if you ask her, she might be able to pinpoint that location down. But can I also ask, on the back of that, do you have any indication about how many people lose their Oyster cards but perhaps believe that they have been pickpocketed?
Not specifically Oyster cards. I mean, this is something that we work with TfL around and around their lost property setup, and there are conversations ongoing at the minute about how could we join our data in some way or make it easier to search across, because actually there's probably a huge amount of that theft that's reported that actually is lost property, I would suggest.
Yeah. And I've just seen actually that Ross Lydell from the Evening Standard has said he's tracked down the Good Samaritan who found the card, which I believe, according to Assembly Member Hall, she was told that it was found lying on a seat, complete with the card and cash. So not a very effective pickpocketer, and returned it to her. We've talked about bystander campaigns, trying to get involved. do you do anything with regards to issues like that about thanking members of the public who have returned property or reported it? Because people could have just thrown it away or whatever.
Definitely, again, on a day-to-day basis, we review all of these kinds of incidents, and not so much. That case is probably a little bit unique, and actually often we don't hear about it in that level of detail, because actually sometimes when the victim has found the property, there isn't always an update into us to say it has been found. But in terms of bystander intervention, suicide interventions, things like that, we make a regular occurrence of writing back to people, or in some cases giving them commendations, divisional commanders commendation in terms of the bravery and the intervention that they've made.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Garrett.
Yeah, it's just a quick question, really, following on from some of Member Berry's questions about CCTV access and retention. And I just wondered, I don't think it quite came up, but whether the process is the same or different with buses, because I've had cases come to me where there seems to be additional, breakdown where obviously the bus company has the thing and not TfL. Does that create a complication and an extra delay, and therefore this possibility that the footage might be lost before eventually the request comes back?
At times, yes. However, the work that Mandy's team has been leading over the last 2 years has meant that inconsistency has really reduced quite significantly. The biggest challenge we have now is some are stored on a cloud, so we can actually retrieve it from the office without having to go on site, and some still are saved onto, footage is still saved onto a hard drive. But that's probably the starkest discrepancy between the two, but it's much better than where it was. So I thank Mandy and her team for that.
Presumably the faster turnover of vehicles, the bus fleet, versus a tube train helps in terms of updating technology on the vehicle. But sorry, Mandy, you were going to ask.
Sorry, I'll leave the bus contracts to you, but Chrissy has a team that is dedicated to getting requests, the crime reports, and then putting that request through to the relevant bus operator for that information, and then we'll follow it up and get it. So that helps in terms of the process. But I mean, it is challenging. You have a number of different operators to have to deal with, but that team really helps in terms of coordination and
so it's still, what I characterise it as, it's still not as good, but it's getting better than it was?
I think it's pretty good, but I might have a biased
And I suppose, so you're absolutely right. So obviously, as we do bus contract renewal and we let contracts for routes across London, and as they come up, we specify now really clearly in the contracts with the operators about both the number of cameras, the position of cameras, the quality of the data, the availability of the data in the cloud. But yeah, it does take the time for those bus routes to be refranchised for those specifications to come in. So there are some operators over some routes where we are slightly behind compared to some of the operators which now have the most kind of cutting edge of technology.
Okay, and is that, presumably, just quick final question, does that include, obviously we're talking mainly here about sort of personal safety type issues, but obviously on the road you've also got road safety issues. Is that the same system, same answer for those kinds of queries?
So obviously, as part of the specification, it includes the forward-facing cameras on buses, which enable us to see, it does mean that we can capture some of the evidence from the road network, and obviously Chrissy's team, are responsible for the leadership within the Met for reducing road danger and safety on the road network, as they are for the safety of passengers on the bus network. So I'll hand to Chrissy if there's anything more you want to add.
Okay. Just to say that there is a dispatch team who can, on occasions like that, where it's a high harm incident, we can actually go to the scene and download the footage with the bus at site. But we'll obviously save that for the most serious of offences.
Understood. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
I think to Miss Hayward or Miss McGregor, why is connectivity on the tube so completely rubbish? Why is connectivity on the tube completely rubbish? Wi-Fi? Name anything, really. I mean, it's no good for 3G, 4G. It's no good for Wi-Fi if you're in a tunnel. On the Elizabeth line, you get promised TfL Wi-Fi when you look for the network. I know Assemblymember Berry's brought this up as well as me. And you get TfL Wi-Fi with the false promise that you might actually be able to connect to the internet. And you can't. It's complete rubbish, apart from the Jubilee line. May I say there's been an advance on the Jubilee line. When are we going to get connectivity on the tube? Because this is not just, as the previous mayor was pretty he didn't like the idea of connectivity on the tube because our group wrote to him, did a report back in 2013 saying we could improve connectivity in the tube. The previous mayor didn't like it because he didn't want to encourage people taking phone calls on the tube. But you know, this is a safety issue as well as a convenience issue, and we've been promised time and time again that we're going to get better connectivity. Assemblymember Berry was promised by the end of this year. I wrote a question last year, and very soon we're going to get the connectivity. When's it going to happen?
So, to the best of my understanding, and I believe you have all, been briefed with this, is that by the end of 2024, all Tube customers will be able to access 4G and 5G mobile connectivity and be able to access the internet across the majority of the Tube network, so 80% of our stations by then, as well as across the Elizabeth line. And we recognise categorically that uninterrupted 4G and 5G mobile coverage is significant and really important to our customers, and you know, the ability to be able to send and receive calls and text messages and surf the web and access social media is vital, and it's a vital part of safety and security. And as we've talked about, the importance of apps and reporting on that. So all the major mobile operators, 3 Mobile, EE, Vodafone and VO and Virgin Media have all signed up to be able to bring high-speed 4G and 5G mobile connectivity across the tube, and that will include in some of our deepest tunnels. So by the end of 2024, we'll see pretty universal coverage.
Well, that's curious because my colleague Sian Berry got on a promise that we would be getting this by the end of this year. I mean, you know, we need some guarantees on this. We've been talking about it in our group since 2013. And we're getting nowhere. We're not really moving forward.
I mean, and progress is being made and we have seen, you know, more stations and more connectivity available in central London.
I'll give you the Jubilee line.
Thank you.
You can have the Jubilee line, but there's a few other lines. You know, I mean, how does? I mean. I was going to ask you about how does TfL publicise ways to access Wi-Fi on the tube. I can't see the point, bearing in mind it's so appallingly rubbish throughout the network. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. I think that's everybody's experience of trying to access the outside world from the tube.
Yeah, and I recognise what you say. I believe that part of the delay is because of the delays in the emergency services network, and which is obviously a Home Office funded and delivered project. And clearly, the mobile connectivity that we're seeking on the tube, that emergency services is the first call for that. And so there's been issues for us in terms of the timing to be able to ensure that the rollout and implementation is in lockstep with the upgrade of the emergency services network. But I'm confident that colleagues will be able to come back to you in writing with absolute confirmation and details on this.
Thank you. You've now made me even more worried, saying that there might be issues with regard to staff, because one of the most important recommendations raised as a result of the review into the terror attacks in 2005 was what held up the response to that was poor communication within the tube network. So I'm a bit more worried now than I was before.
So I'm not saying that there's poor connection now. I'm just saying in terms of that upgrade for the emergency services network that we wanted, there was some delays, I understand, in aspects of that, but now that is back on track, and we're ensuring that the mobile connectivity improvements are in coincidence with that. And you know, Chris is often in deep tube stations with his radio, and we'll be able to confirm how good the connections are.
Just briefly,
for you,
it's the the entire overhaul of the emergency services network. So, and a big part of that is making sure that it is right, so that when we move to new technology, the underground and everywhere else is connected. So we've got connectivity now. We use it every single day in terms of our radio communications. There are no challenges.
Yeah, that's
in that
all right.
space.
Okay, sorry, I took the wrong end of the stick. Happy to admit I was wrong. I'd just like to say, Chief Superintendent, I did report crime on the DLR. Curiously enough, at Royal Victoria here, and I got amazing service to the extent that I got thoroughly fed up with your people ringing me up, giving me a progress, telling me what was happening with regard to the case. So I'd rather be upset at that than not being responded to. And personally, I thought you were performed absolutely excellently, but less phone calls. I mean,
it's always a nervous moment when you give an example like that.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't. But no, that's brilliant, and that hopefully demonstrates the service we give every day.
Absolutely.
And Chrissy's earlier point around the public reporting portal, so that's through the Met, but Single Online Home. So all forces eventually will get that access. So you could choose to say, I just want to check online.
Yeah, and actually, people used to go, why have we got the BTP and the Met? And actually, they worked. In my case, they worked extremely well together. There was no hiccup as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now move to Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. Yes, mine's to London TravelWatch. So, Alex, are there any other key priorities you think should be undertaken from your research that perhaps we haven't talked about today?
Thank you. I feel we've had quite a wide-ranging discussion, so hopefully I think a lot of it has been spoken about. One thing which I guess is more of a thread throughout everything that's done is I think it's really important to make sure that we're working with organisations, with communities, with representative groups throughout everything, obviously on specific personal security things, but also, it crops up in all parts of transport. And again, so it's making sure that everyone's voice is heard, they'll know their needs best, what makes them feel safe best. So again, just, I think co-design is the ideal, where you can't do that, like meaningful consultation with people, again, just to make sure that policies that are implemented, things that are put into place, will work as best as they can for the people who, will be protected by them. So I think that, again, threads kind of through everything, through the infrastructure points, through the bystander points, through staff training, through all of that. I think that is probably the main thing that I would encourage. I think everything, there's lots and lots of recommendations, but I think those are the sort of the key strands.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, that winds up today's session. Sorry, did you want to say something, Mandy, before we... No, sorry, I thought I indicated. Sorry. So that winds up today's session. So I'd like to thank all our guests for attending. It's been really interesting and quite informative. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with, but in the meantime, you're more than welcome to leave. We'll only be here for a couple of minutes. And can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussions?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in the consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the committee's work programme and the additional activity undertaken since its last meeting, namely the Thames Clipper site visit on the River Thames?
Noted. Very good.
And I'd like to thank Thames Clippers for that publicly. And then we look to the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 18th of December at 10 a.m. in the chamber. Lovely, thank you. Finally, there is no other urgent business. So just before I close, I just once again thank the Mayor from Uganda coming along. Thank you very much, sir. And the meeting is now closed.